Hey, well, hello. Hello there.
Just you and me so far, huh?
Hey, yeah, it seems like it. It seems like it. So, yeah, I mean, I think I did get an email from someone that they unfortunately couldn't make it today and they would be watching the recording. And I'm not sure where everyone else is, but yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll get started. So, okay, so go ahead and download the file for today's
Got it.
if you haven't. Okay.
Yeah, I have it and I printed out the cheat sheet and ready
Okay.
to go, raring to go.
Okay. Well,
Because
awesome.
what you cover here doesn't cover some of the stuff I'm working on now. I'll have a personal problem for you to solve at the end of class.
Oh yeah. Oh totally. Yeah, we could
Good.
totally chat after class for sure. There'll be some time. So, okay.
Cool.
Okay. And just for those who are maybe watching the recording, the file for today's lesson is Photoshop lesson file number 8, non-destructive approaches. And there's also a cheat sheet connected to today's lesson as well. And that's cheat sheet number 8, also titled non-destructive approaches. Okay. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen here, and then we're gonna jump into the lesson. Go ahead and this. All right. Okay, so here we are. Here we are in Photoshop. Okay, so today's lesson is our last lesson. And I'm going to be covering some new non-destructive approaches, but we're also going to review a lot of the non-destructive approaches or like non-destructive tools and techniques that we've talked about previously, right? So today, the new thing, the big new thing that I'm going to introduce is working with smart objects. So I'm going to talk about smart objects. I'm also going to talk about blending modes, which are actually pretty cool. Blending modes are, uh, you know, they're not too difficult to work with. I mean, they're kind of a simple tool or a simple function, but they have some really interesting possibilities with them. So I'll talk about those, and then I'll review other non-destructive techniques as I've mentioned. Okay, so just to sort of redefine non-destructive editing or non-destructive techniques or a non-destructive approach, non-destructive editing in Photoshop is basically working in a way where the things that you're doing are temporary, where they can be modified or removed at any time. Okay, and we're gonna just keep that in mind. If you guys are interested after today's lesson in exploring non-destructive editing even further, intermediate Photoshop, the next level to this class, focuses uh, non-destructive techniques. So, we dive much deeper into Photoshop, and everything that we do is non-destructive in there. Okay. And now I'll talk more about intermediate after today's lesson as well, if you guys are curious about the next level. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's go ahead and start. So what we're going to do is we're just going to sort of play around with a document, sort of create the start or a mock-up to like something that could serve as like an invitation or a letterhead or card or something like that. Okay. All right, so let's go and start by creating a new document. So I'm going to use my keyboard shortcut here. So Command or Control if you're using Windows, and then hitting the letter N. N is in new, N is in Nancy. Oh, sorry, I have I think I have Zoom activated. There we go. All right. And let's go ahead and start with this default Photoshop size. I think that looks pretty good. So the default Photoshop size is 7 inches by 5 inches, which would be a pretty standard kind of like large postcard sort of size print. Okay, so 7 inches by 5 inches is what we want. All right, let's go ahead and then we'll click create. It's like that. Okay. I just reset my Photoshop here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and close out this contextual taskbar. Don't really need that. And then I don't have my history window, and that's always useful. So I'm going to go to Window, come down to History, open up this history window here. And I like to place it over here on the right side. I find that to be a nice spot for the history window. Okay. All right. So if we're going to go in and then design some sort of like invitation or letterhead or card or something, I think a common sort of want is to be able to change the color of the background, right? Like if you wanted to fill the background with a certain color, I'm going to show you guys how to do that. Okay. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to go down to the layers panel. So in my layers panel, and then at the very bottom, we have a bunch of little icons that are shortcuts to some common functions that you'd want to use when you're working with layers. Okay. And the one that we're looking for is the one that kind of looks like a circle with a slash through it. It's right in the center of all the icons. If you hover over it, this little yellow box will pop out and it says create new fill or adjustment layer. Let's go ahead and click on it. And if you click on it, this little window kind of pops up. And you'll notice that a lot of these adjustments look very familiar, right? Like they're similar to the image adjustments or the adjustment layers that we've looked at already, right? Now, the interesting thing is if you're applying image adjustments, let's just pause for a second. I'm just going to talk about image adjustments. When you apply an image adjustment, right, like working with levels or working with vibrance or hue saturation or color balance, right? These are all adjustments that we've looked at already, right? If you apply these adjustments from here, image adjustments, and then click on one of these are destructive. They will change your picture and the change is permanent, right? So this is an example of destructive editing. So image adjustments are destructive. Okay. We've looked at adjustment layers, right? So adjustment layers are the same adjustments, but they're applied as layers that sit on top of, whichever layers, they affect whichever layers are underneath them in your layers panel, right? These are non-destructive. So with these adjustments, if you do hue saturation or if you adjust brightness contrast here, you can delete that layer, that adjustment layer at any time, or you can come in and modify it any time. So that is non-destructive editing, right? So down here with this little icon, while it allows you to create those same exact adjustment layers the same way, right? So, I mean, I could have clicked them up here or down here. It's going to create the adjustment layer just exactly the same. Okay.
Jerry,
Yeah. Uh-huh.
one question. I lost all my settings and I don't know where to find now to have the adjustments and the layers down there where you have them. I can only go to the top menu. I don't know what I've done, but I don't have them anymore.
Okay. Well, you can reset your window by going to window. And then
Window.
if you go to workspace,
Okay.
we're currently using the essentials
Let's.
workspace. So if you don't have that selected, check essentials. And if you do have it checked,
Okay.
you can click reset essentials and it will
Reset
reset the window.
essentials.
Uh-huh.
I got it. Yeah. Sorry. Yeah, I got it. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and I would recommend after you reset essentials is basically like resetting your Photoshop. I would open up the history window, right? And then place it the way I did. And that will
Yeah.
kind of get you back. Yep. Okay, great.
Mhm. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. All right. So, okay. So right in here, so when we click on this, you have access to those same adjustment layers, but another thing that you have access to are fill layers. Okay. So fill layers are kind of cool because they allow you to fill the background with a color, a gradient, or a pattern, and it allows you to do it non-destructively. Okay. So let's take a look. So let's go. What we're going to do is we're going to click on solid color. Okay. Let's go ahead and click on it. All right, so here we have a window that's popped up, and you'll notice that my background has also changed in color, right? Now, at the moment, my foreground color for, like my brush was set to black, and so that's the color that's filling the background of my page, okay? Now, if I wanted to choose a different color, all you have to do is just change that color in your color picker box. And I'm thinking if we're designing like a card or something, right? Maybe I want like a nice light kind of pleasant color. So you could do something like you could do a light yellow if you want. You could do a light green. So remember when you're picking colors, if you want something that's little bit brighter and a little less saturated, you're probably going to be somewhere in the upper leftish kind of corner of the color picker box, right? The further to the right you are, the more saturated the color, and the lower down you are, the darker the color, right? So we kind of want sort of like a pastel-y type of color, so something light, something pleasant. Feel free to choose whatever color. Like if I wanted like a light blue, I could do that. Okay. All right, so go ahead and pick whatever color you want for the background here for the page. And I'm gonna apply this, and then I'm gonna show you guys how to change it if you change your mind. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead. We'll click OK. And there it is. It's applied our choice. Okay. Now you'll notice in my layers panel, I now have a new layer, right? It says color fill 1. And there's a little preview of what the background color looks like, right? So it's like this light blue color that I currently have. Okay. Now this is non-destructive, right? It's non-destructive because we can remove it. We can get rid of it at any time. So if you want to get rid of this like this color fill layer, there are a couple possibilities here, right? If you just want to temporarily hide it so that, it's still there, but then you could, reuse it or, apply it to your design later, you could always just click the little eyeball symbol on it. So notice in the layers panel, there's a little eyeball. If you click on it, it just makes that layer invisible. Okay. Now, if we decide to print this or export it and a layer is invisible, it's as if it doesn't exist, right? So it doesn't affect your design in any way. So if you just want to hide something, you can always hit the little eyeball on it. Or don't do this, but I'm just going to show you it's a possibility. If you don't want it, you could just delete it. So I could go into my layers panel here, click the little trash can when this layer is selected. If I click the little trash can, it's going to ask me if I want to delete that layer. When I delete it, it just disappears. Right. Now, there are a lot of different ways in which you can delete something. You could right click on it and then click delete. You can also drag something down to the trash can as well. Like I can click and then just drag it down to the trash can, and it will also delete as well. Right. So, whichever way you find, the quickest, or the most comfortable, a lot of different ways to do the exact same thing. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and bring this back. All right. So it's non-destructive because we can get rid of it at any time, right? We can also modify it at any time. So if you decide later that you want a different colored background, look at this. I can double click on this layer. So if I double click on it, it brings back the color picker box, and now I can choose a different color. So if I wanted yellow, I could do like a nice, pleasant yellow, just like that. You guys see that? Now we could have filled the background with a, the paint bucket tool, right? We could have done that. We could have used a big brush to paint in the background, right? But those, I mean, technically are destructive. I mean, if we wanted to change the background color, I mean, it would just be another paint bucket with a different color and just paint over it. So it's not a big deal. But technically, it is destructive because you're doing a technique that is, in a way, permanently changing your image, right? So fill layers are non-destructive editing. Okay. All right. So any questions? Any questions about that? Like the definition for non-destructive editing and why fill layers are non-destructive. Great. Okay. All right. So the next thing I want to talk about is how we're going to bring in a picture that we're going to be incorporating into our design. Okay. Now I have a picture of a leaf that I want to bring in. Now I've shown you guys up to this class, like a bunch of different ways to bring images in, right? You could select all, right, of a picture, copy and paste it over, and then select out the object, and then, block out the background using a layer mask, right? That was one way that we did things. You could just select out an object from, a different document, copy and paste it over to this one. So you would just copy the thing that you wanted. Or last week, I showed you guys how to drag and drop something, right? You go over to another document, use your move tool, drag it up to the tab for this one, and just drop it right into the document. So we have a bunch of different ways to bring in pictures, right? Today, I'm going to show you guys maybe the most like advanced way to do this. And we'll talk about why it is, or why it's the preferred way because it gives you some advantages. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to use the place embedded function. Okay, so the way to do that is we're going to go up to File. So we're going to go up to the File menu here. And when you come down, you'll notice that there are two options here. There's place embedded and there's place linked. Okay, now both functions will place an object or an image into your document. Okay, the difference between place embedded and place linked is that place embedded actually places the file, the image file itself into this document. Okay, place linked just places a preview of the image into the document. Now, if you're wondering what the difference is, the difference is that with place embedded, your Photoshop document, your PSD file, essentially becomes a container for everything. Okay. With place linked, what you have to do is you have to keep the original JPEG adjacent to the PSD file. Otherwise, what will happen is when you open up your document and let's say you've moved that JPEG somewhere else, or you transferred the PSD file without also transferring the JPEG, you're going to end up with broken links. And so Photoshop will tell you that you have broken links when you open it up. It may, show you like a low quality sort of preview in some cases. In other cases, you might not see anything at all. Okay. If you're curious why you would do that, the situation where you would work with place linked is typically when you're working collaboratively with people, right? So for example, let's say you're working at a magazine and you're designing the cover for this magazine. You have someone whose job it is to lay out the text. You have a photographer who's photographing a model for the cover. You have someone else maybe who's designing some sort of like, other graphics and other designs. And so you have these elements all linked to the same document, and then different people connected to those documents. And then you're all kind of combining them into this final PSD, right? So it's kind of rare, I guess, that people would use place linked. It also does help to keep the original file size down because everything sits outside of the Photoshop document. Your PSD file isn't as big, but again, you're keeping all those different parts outside. So what I always recommend is for us, always use place embedded. Whenever I, place any images, I always do place embedded. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and click on it. So let's click on place embedded. All right, so let's go ahead. So Kit's asking, when you click and drag, which is it doing? It is, I guess, technically doing the place embedded because it's actually placing the image in there. You can't get broken links by doing, the drag and drop. So, yeah, so that's more like the place embedded.
So it's placing a copy.
It is placing a copy, but it's creating it as a whole, like it's a separate layer. It's like the whole image is getting placed into your document. Like you're not losing anything by doing it that way. Yeah. Yeah, but I'm going to show you the place embedded. Using the place function gives you some other advantages, beyond the drag and drop. Yeah. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's navigate to where our lesson folder is. So right here where it says on your computer, I'm gonna go ahead and click on my computer. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and navigate to where my lesson folder is. So for me, it's sitting on my desktop. Here it is, Photoshop lesson file 8, non-destructive approaches. And double click on that. All right, so we have a lot of images that we're gonna be working with today, so don't get overwhelmed. A lot of these are gonna go into the same document because we're gonna be designing 2 different movie posters together. So that's why there are so many images. But the first one that we're gonna be working with is gonna be this leaves1.jpg is what we want. So leaves1.jpg, okay? And let's go ahead, we're gonna click place, okay? All right. All right. So it takes a second. And then what Photoshop does is it takes the whole image and then it places it, well, onto your canvas. Okay. Now you'll notice right off the bat, there's the transformation bounding box around my picture. Okay. So I could scale my picture right now if I wanted. right? Now for us, I think it looks fine. I'm going to go ahead and just hit return or enter on my keyboard to go ahead and just place it. So I'm going to hit return or enter, and it's going to finish placing this image into my document. So you can see here in my history, notice it says place embedded, and then it says smart object. Okay, so let's talk about this for a moment. So what is a smart object? Well, to understand what a smart object is, we have to talk about, really quickly, we just have to talk about one of the limitations or one of the challenges when you're working with raster-based images. Okay, you guys remember, I defined Photoshop at the very beginning of the class as a raster-based image editing application, right? We're working with raster graphics. So raster graphics are basically images that are made up of pixels, okay? So just pause here for a second. I'm going to zoom in here and just remind you guys that pixels are these single colored squares. I'm just zooming in, right? These single colored squares that make up most of the digital images that you see, right? Like digital pictures from digital cameras, pictures from scanners, most images, the vast majority of images that you interact with or encounter on the web, they're all like almost always raster graphics, right? The thing about pixel-based images or raster graphics is that pixels can only be oriented one way. Like pixels can only be sitting perfectly flat, right? Parallel top and bottom, perfectly straight parallel edges, right? You can't put pixels sitting at an angle. Like you can't have a pixel sitting like a diamond, with like a pointy top and a pointy bottom. You can't do that. And so what happens is when you have an object that you've brought into your project, and then you transform this object, let's say you rotate it, right? So if I take this picture right here and I, transform it and I rotate it, even just if it's like ever so slightly, right? What Photoshop has to do every single time you transform this, rotating it, scaling it, making it bigger or making it smaller, is that it has to rewrite the pixels. Okay, so if I hit return here, all the pixels get rewritten so that when I zoom back into this object, notice again, the pixels are still sitting straight up and down. Okay. So one of the things that I demonstrate to my students when I teach like the credit sort of like version of this class is that, I bring in a picture with like text and we transform it a bunch of times. And then we rotate it back to its original position. And I show that, every single time you transform it, the image becomes more and more degraded. And after you've rotated or transformed an object several times, it's like almost unrecognizable. It's basically just like a blob. Like, like you no longer see, clear definitions in the object, or you no longer see clear letters. They sort of look like a blurry, sort of smudged version of those original letters. Right. So that's what's happening every single time you transform something. Okay. So the solution that Adobe came up with was, like what we are now looking at, a smart object. And basically what a smart object is Photoshop keeps a copy of the original picture, right? The one that you placed into this document. Okay. So it keeps that original version. And then every single time you transform this object, it refers back to the original. So each transformation does degrade the picture, but only by one step. So it never goes more than one step away from the original, okay? So it's kind of an interesting trick, right, to maintain the quality of your images or your objects when you have like, you're trying to create a collage, right? Or you're trying to put together some sort of composite image and you're working on it for a long time and moving things around and stuff like that, right? So it maintains the quality of your pictures, okay? But there are also some limitations to working with smart objects. So let's talk about that, okay? So when you're working with a smart object, actually, I'm sorry. Before we go to the limitations, I do want to point out, not like maybe some advantages to working with smart objects. Maybe let's talk about that first, right? So it preserves quality, okay? And you know that you have a smart object because right over here in your thumbnail for this layer, it has a little icon right over here, right? A little image. And if you hover over it, it says Smart Object Thumbnail. Okay, so this tells you, this image right here tells you that this is a smart object. Okay. So smart objects are just created automatically when you use the place embedded function. It will just create a smart object. Now, if you have a picture that's not a smart object, like you drag and dropped it, and you want to turn it into a smart object, you can also right click onto your layer, and then you'll see the option to convert it to a smart object. Okay. Now, so right here, I mean, it already is a smart object, but you can see the option right there to convert to smart object. Okay. All right. Another sort of like advantage that comes out of working with smart objects is notice that this layer has automatically been renamed, right? It has the name of the file. Now, for us, this actually does save us some time because, I rename all of the JPEGs for our lessons just so that when we locate them, it's, we're all on the same page and it's easy to identify, the images that we're looking for, right? Now, if you're saving images from the web, and they have like, a bunch of random characters as the file name, then you'll still want to go back in and rename your layers, okay? But notice that this layer does have a name already. It's not, just, layer 1, right? Like it actually says leaves 1, which was the file. But let's go ahead and rename this anyways. I'm going to double click on it. And let's just delete that extra number 1 there. We don't need that, okay? Now, another more subtle advantage of smart objects is that Photoshop will automatically resize your pictures so that they fit your canvas. Okay. Now, this picture with the leaves is actually smaller than the size of my canvas. And so notice it doesn't completely fill the canvas. But, in some cases, if you have pictures that are really big, way bigger than your canvas, they can actually sit off of your canvas, right? Like, and you'll have to select them, scale them down so that they fit. But when you're working with smart objects, Photoshop will automatically resize your images so that they fit onto your canvas. And if they are smaller than the canvas, then Photoshop will just size them to as big as they are, and like however they look at 100%. Okay. All right, let's talk about the limitations now of smart objects, okay? The biggest limitation of working with smart objects is that you cannot directly edit or modify a smart object, meaning you can't paint on a smart object and you can't erase anything from a smart object. Okay, let's take a look at what happens if I try to paint on this smart object. Okay, so if I select my brush tool, keyboard shortcut the letter B, B is in brush, B is in boy. Okay, notice that there's the the no smoking sign, right? The no go sign, right? So it's telling me that I can't paint on this. Okay. Now, in the past, if you tried to paint on it, this little window pops up and it says, this smart object must be rasterized before proceeding. Edit contents will no longer be available. And then it asks you, do you want to rasterize the smart object? Okay, rasterized meaning converted back to regular pixels. Okay, well, the answer is no, right? We like it as a smart object. We want to keep it a smart object, right? So whenever you see this, go ahead and hit cancel, right? So I'm just going to hit cancel there, and I do not want to rasterize it. Okay. All right, so let me ask you guys then. Let's say you wanted to paint on top of this with a brush, right? And you can't paint on the smart object, then what could you do? What's an option?
Create a layer.
Yeah, exactly, right? Yeah, you can just create a new blank layer on top, and then you could do whatever you want to that layer on top. Exactly. Yeah. So here, on this blank layer, since it's not a smart object, I can paint on it, and it looks like I'm painting on the smart object. Okay, so if I wanted to delete something from a smart object, let me undo this really quick. I don't need that extra layer. So if I want to delete something from my smart object or get rid of something, also notice that I can't do that, right? So I can't paint on it. I can't erase or delete anything from the smart object. But notice right now, I kind of have like a montage situation going on, right? Like I have the leaf, and then I have this white background, which is making the leaf look, like it's separated from the background of my design, right? So what we're going to do to get rid of that white background, okay? The way that we're going to do that is we're going to use a layer mask to do that. You guys remember layer masks are non-destructive technique, right? Layer masks allow you to block things out so that it's temporary and it's not permanent. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead. So if you guys remember the lesson when we used the layer mask was what was that? That was the lesson with the I think it was like the guy with like the spiky hair, right? It was where I introduced it. So if you remember, to be able to create a layer mask, what you need to do is make a selection of what you want to keep. And then when you create the layer mask, Photoshop blocks out whatever is outside of your selection. Right? So if I have this leaf here that I want to keep, well, let's go ahead. I'm going to use let's use the quick selection tool. Okay, so right over here. All right, so I have my selection brush tool. Oh, I didn't even realize that Adobe in the recent update renamed this tool. So it's no longer called the quick selection tool. Now it's called the selection brush tool, which is cool. All right. All right, so there it is. So it's like a paintbrush that we use to select. Let's go ahead and resize our brush here. I'm going to hit the left bracket key here just to make my brush a little smaller. And then I'm going to go ahead and just paint inside of this. Wait, what is this? This is like completely brand new. I've just recently updated my my Photoshop. Oh, you know what? Actually, this is not even in the right spot. I don't know why I saw that brush. I'm sorry. We don't want that selection brush. Sorry. I guess that is a new brush. I'm gonna have to explore that deeper. We want the quick selection tool, which is in the 4th slot. Sorry about that. Click and hold. We want the quick selection tool. So in the 4th slot, 1, 2, 3, 4, click and hold, and then we want the one that says quick selection tool. So sorry, I take back what I said before. The quick selection tool is the paintbrush, but what it will do is it will spread your selection. So what I could see right away is that the selection tool kind of looks like, kind of reminds me of working in quick mask mode, if anything. But okay, so let's go ahead. We'll use the quick selection tool, which will spread. So as I'm painting with the quick selection tool, here's what we want. So as I'm painting, notice it's spreading my selection here, right? And it's filling, it's kind of growing. And the nice thing, it's like pretty smart, right? So it's detecting that edge and then it stops right at the edge of my object, okay? Which is pretty good.
Jerry, I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but it's selecting the whole square, the whole leaves. I think I know what I'm doing wrong. I didn't select
The leaves
the
layer,
leaves.
right?
I have, yeah, okay. I answered my own question. Okay, sorry.
Okay. Oh, no problem. All right. Okay, so go ahead and select the leaves here. So right now we have the leaves. Okay. All right. And I'm not too worried about the little stem there. I just need the leaves, right? The main part of the leaves like that. Okay. And now what we're gonna do is we're gonna block out the background, right? So we're gonna do that by using a layer mask. So in my layers panel right here, let's go down to the bottom. So we have our little icons here, little shortcuts. And the one that we want is the 3rd one from the left, right? If you hover over it, it should say layer masks. So if you click on it, it will create a layer mask. So I'm going to click. All right. So notice in my layers panel here, there's the thumbnail for the leaves smart object. And then linked to it is a stencil, right? You guys remember with the stencil or the layer mask, anything that's black is like blocked out, and then anything that's like in the white shape is what's remaining, right? And so notice my my selection here disappeared, and whatever was inside my selection, well, it lines up with the mask, and then whatever was outside is now blocked out. Okay. The advantage of working with layer masks is it's also non-destructive, right? So if I wanted to bring back any part of this image, well, click on the layer mask. And if I paint with a black brush, well, it blocks out, right? So black brush blocks out. And then if I paint with a white brush, so I'm just hitting the letter X there. X is an X-ray to swap my foreground and my background color. Painting with a white brush brings back. You guys see that? So this is non-destructive. It's temporary, right? All right, so let me just go ahead and undo all that. All right, so here it is. So we have our background now blocked out. Okay, so you can always use non-destructive techniques on smart objects. Okay. All right, so any questions? Any questions about that?
How did you, I've forgotten since it's been several weeks, did we correct the quick select tool parts? Do we like hold down shift or
Oh yeah,
click and
so with
drag?
with quick selection, it should automatically add to your selection when you paint. It's just like it by default is additive. So as you paint, it spreads and it grows. If it spreads beyond your object, you can hold down the Option key or the Alt key, in which case where you're painting, it will then remove. Yeah.
What about places that it missed? So mine missed the stems at the bottom. It
Oh,
grabbed the leaves, but it missed the stems.
yeah. So in that case, then you would maybe zoom in and then make your brush really small and then go in and you would just paint
Ah,
with it and it will add it.
okay, thank you.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. All right. Okay, so here it is. So right now we have our leaves nice and isolated and everything. Okay. All right. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to do a sort of overlay onto the leaves just to make them a little bit more visually interesting. Okay. All right, so the way that we're going to do that is we're going to create a new layer on top. Okay, so let's go ahead. We're going to create a new layer here. So my layers panel, I'm going to go down here. I'm going to click the little square with the plus sign in the center. It's the second icon from the right. Okay, so if you hover over it, it will say create a new layer. Let's go ahead and click on it. Okay. All right, so here it is. I have a new layer, my new layer 1 here. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a gradient on this layer. Okay, let's take a look at that. So the gradient tool, the keyboard shortcut for it is the letter G. G is in gradient, G is in Greg. So if you hit the letter G on your keyboard, it will activate the gradient tool. Okay. So the way that gradients work in Photoshop is that this tool allows you to draw a line on your layer, right? So if I draw a line, let's say I start over here on the left side and I click and I drag and I draw it across like this, okay? What Photoshop basically does is it puts one color on one end and then it transitions to the other color on the other end. Now, at the moment, my gradient is going from black to white, and I think technically it's actually set as my foreground to my background color, I think, or might be set to black to white, whatever it is, right? And so what you see is black on one end, white on the other, and then you have a 50-50 blend of the two, so a 50% gray sitting right at the middle. Okay. Now you'll notice that the end of this line, what Photoshop does is it just fills in, like, like it just sort of continues this line to like infinity. And then past this end point, it just fills it in the rest of the way with the end color. Okay.
What is G doesn't give you a gradient? I'm just getting black.
If what if you're not getting a gradient?
Yeah.
Maybe you have a different. Oh, maybe if you have, I think it might be set to foreground to background color, and that's why it's doing that. So if you have, black as both your background and foreground, then maybe that's why you're seeing that. So maybe
No,
under basics right here, do you see under basics? You might select black to white. It's the third one. So if you set the third one. Oh, and I don't even know why here it just added I don't know
it
why.
says, I'm not even certain. I've got foregrounds, pattern. I don't know what basics, where basics is on mine.
At the very top, there's like so you have the gradient tool selected, right? Oh, make sure that you have the gradient tool because I know we've used the paint bucket tool before. So the gradient tool, the
Yeah, I
icon
see.
for it looks like a transition between black.
That, yeah, G chose the bucket
The
tool.
bucket tool, yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I forgot. Yeah, because I reset my Photoshop. So it went back to the default. the
Yeah.
initial sort of tool, but yeah, you have to select the gradient tool.
That was it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Now, the gradient, notice when I'm drawing the gradient, it is affected by the length of the gradient line that you're drawing, right? So the shorter the line is, so if I draw a really short line, notice that the gradient is a lot shorter and the transition is a lot more abrupt, right? If the gradient is longer, then the transition is going to be a lot more gradual, right? You can also draw it at an angle. Like, I could do a diagonal if I wanted. I could also draw it vertically, right? And the gradient moves across, again, that line. I could even draw it upside down, backwards, going from right to left, just like that, okay? All right, so what I'm going to show you guys how to do is how to create your own custom gradient if you wanted to do that. Okay, so to create a custom gradient, what you can do is right up here, you guys see where there's kind of like a little preview of what my current gradient is, right? So go ahead, I'm sorry, before we do that, let's go ahead and we can just draw a line here, like a gradient line, something like this, okay? And then I'm going to go and go right up here and I'm going to click the little drop down arrow. So there's a little drop down arrow here. And you'll notice that there are just a bunch of like presets for gradients, right? If I click on this, you can see they're sort of grouped by color, right? And there's some gradients that are only like 2 colors. There are other gradients that are like 3 colors. You can have multicolored gradients. I think in one of them, I forget which one it is. It's like it might be under red or something. Oh, there's 3 there. Pastels, neutral, like there's even like a gradient that's like all like rainbow colors and stuff. There's a whole bunch of different gradients, okay? Now, if you want to create your own like custom gradient, like a custom preset or something, right over here there's a little plus sign, again in a square, and if you hover over it, it says create a new preset, okay? Let's go ahead and oh no, I'm sorry. Maybe we don't have to do that. No, I think we have to go to the sorry, to create the new gradient, like actually create the new gradient from scratch, you have to go to where the gear is. So where the little gear symbol is. And then there you have to click new gradient preset there. Okay. Otherwise, if you had, like a gradient already created and you wanted to create a preset for it, then you would click the little plus sign. But here we actually have to create it. So let's go ahead and go to new gradient preset right here at the top. I'll click on that. Oh no, I guess not. So what am I doing?
It does it for me, I think. New gradient preset. I get gradient name and I get to rename the gradient.
I don't know what they changed. It should allow you to go in and then set. Oh, you know what? Actually, I'm sorry. I realized this is something. I don't know why I forgot this. So Adobe changed this the last update, and this actually came up last time I taught this class, and I just I realized this, and then I just slipped my mind. Because it was the way I was going to describe it for like 10 years. And then just a couple months ago, they actually changed this. So it used to be that when you clicked on this new gradient preset, that it would take you into a separate window where you would then create your gradient. What Adobe changed recently was that they got rid of that window. And this properties panel is kind of a newer thing. Adobe's sort of like been moving in this direction of doing dynamic panels that change depending on, the tools or the functions that you're using. So they could kind of consolidated that separate window into the properties panel. Okay, so sorry. So if you want to create a new gradient under properties, if you scroll down, here's where we can change the gradient right down here. Okay, so it's in the properties panel now. So what we can do is we can select the colors that we want for our gradient. Okay, now on the left side, this is going to be the color on the left side of your gradient. So if you want to change that color, you would just click on it, double click on it, and then you can pick whatever color you want. All right, so let's say I wanted like red on one side. I can go ahead and choose red here, just like that. So choose like a nice red color. We'll do that. Okay. All right. I'm going to go ahead and click OK there to go ahead and apply that selection for that color. All right. Now on the right side, let's pick another color for that. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on that circle. And then maybe for this gradient, I'm going to do, I don't know, let's do blue. We'll do something like nice, like blue, just like that. Okay. All right, and then I'll go ahead and I'll click OK. All right, so notice I have red on one side, and then I have blue on the other, and then I have a 50-50 blend of the two colors, which comes out to like, kind of looks like, like violet, right? Or it looks like purple. Just the blending of those two colors. Okay, now if you want to change that, the proportions of one color versus the other, or the position of the 50-50 blend, you can do that by moving the circle, right? So if I wanted more blue in my gradient, I can take the blue color and I can move it to the left. And notice that blue becomes a lot more prominent in my gradient, right? I can also move this diamond right here, which marks the midpoint, or where like the blend point is for my two colors. And if I move that, I can also shift the prominence of one color versus the other as well, right? Okay. Now, if you want to add another color to the gradient, let's say I wanted to put blue at the center here, and I wanted to add another color on the other end. Well, notice when you put your cursor where this line is, there's a little plus sign that appears. Well, when you click, it adds another circle right over there, and now you can have another color, right? So if I wanted to add, let's say, double click on this and add the color yellow, for example, I can just move up to yellow, and now I have yellow, just like that. And there's the 50-50 blend between yellow and blue, and it kind of looks kind of greenish, right? All right, so right now I have like a three-color gradient, just like that. Okay.
When I try to change the colors, except for the last one where we added another, it gives me an eyedropper in the area where all the colors are, and I can't, but I can't seem to change the colors.
Oh, to change the colors, you have to click on the circle that's underneath.
Right. I've got one clicked.
Uh-huh.
And then, I see it now. Never mind.
Great. Okay. All right, so there's my gradient. So now, once you created the gradient, if you wanted to save this gradient, then you can go up to up to the option bar up here, and then if you click that, it should save this color. So you could rename this, and I could call it, red to blue to yellow or something, right? And I can save it, and there it is. It's saved that gradient just like that. Okay. All right, so now I currently have this gradient, and I can draw this gradient however I want. Like if I wanted to draw it diagonally, look at this. I could totally do that with this gradient. Okay. All right, so any questions about that? About just kind of like the basics right now of working with gradients? Okay. All right. So if you guys are interested in applying gradients as your background, right, as a fill layer, you can also do that similar to how we created the color fill layer, right? So again, if you go down here to the bottom of your layers panel, click on that circle in the center, you'll notice the option to create a gradient fill layer. And then it will, allow you to create a gradient just like this, and then it non-destructively fills your background. And actually, this is actually something where Adobe sort of like kind of consolidated the gradient tool itself used to create gradients different, but now it kind of technically already does like create a gradient fill. That's essentially what we've done here, right? So just another way of sort of activating this tool. Okay. Okay. All right. So things are looking good. Now, at the moment, my gradient is completely blocking out my leaves and the background, right? Like the background color. Okay. And the reason for that is that the gradient at the moment is completely opaque, right? So in Photoshop, when something's opaque, it just means it's solid, right? You can't see through it. And layers that are on top completely block out layers that are underneath. Okay. Now, we have looked at one way in which we can change that, right? If we lower the opacity on a layer, you guys remember this? So if we lower the opacity, so if I go to opacity here, and I lower the opacity on this layer, well, this layer becomes see-through, right? The lower the opacity, the more see-through it is, right? And at 100%, the gradient fill layer is then completely invisible, right? And actually, just to, I think if I don't want to see the gradient anymore, I can just click anywhere in my layers panel just to deselect the gradient fill if I don't want to see that line sitting over my picture. Okay. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. We do actually need to bring back the gradient fill here. Let's bring that back. And I can just click anywhere to deselect it like that. Okay. All right. Okay. So opacity is one option. Okay. But the thing is, you guys notice when we turn down the opacity, it just made the gradient just look faded, right? It kind of makes it look faded in kind of an even way. And so if you're just doing that, you're kind of limited, right? And kind of like some of the possibilities, like creative possibilities, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you guys how to work with blending modes. Okay. What blending modes are like it's like a function that allows you to change the relationship between layers. Okay. Now, the thing about blending modes is that there are a whole bunch of them. Oh, and actually to look at them, we need to let's go and select the gradient fill layer again. So I go select that. And right now, my blending mode is currently set to normal. Okay, so what normal just means is layers on top or pixels on top block out layers or pixels underneath, right? Whatever's on top blocks out whatever's underneath. So my gradient is blocking out the pixels for the leaves and then the pixels for my color fill layer. Okay, now if you click the little drop down arrow right here, if you click on that, you're going to see a whole list of different functions. Okay. Now, if you sort of hover over them, like you take your cursor and just kind of move over them, it shows you the results of those blending modes. Okay. Now, the thing about blending modes, there are a lot of them, and some of them are predictable, and then other ones are not as predictable, right? Some of them are based on mathematics and like converting colors to numbers and then using some sort of arithmetic or whatever to change those numbers. Other ones are just based on light and dark. Other ones are based on other like kind of unpredictable things. Okay, so the thing about blending modes is that a lot of times when you're trying to figure out which blending mode to use, it just comes down to experimentation. You sort of try them out and you see the result. And if you like it, then you go with it. If you don't like it, then you try something else. Okay. Now, eventually, after playing with this for a while, you sort of develop, you'll just kind of develop a tendency to go to certain ones. It's kind of like I compare it to like applying different fonts to a report, right? If anyone here is like, had to create a title page or something to like an essay or report, you try out certain fonts, and then eventually there's certain fonts that you go to for specific situations, right? You want a clean font. Maybe you're using Arial or you're using Helvetica, right? If you want something that's a little more traditional, you go to Times New Roman or Courier or whatever, right? Blending modes are kind of like that. You try them out, and if you like them, then go with it. If you don't, then try something else. Okay. Now for this one, we're going to do is we're going to take a look at, let's try, I'm going to do overlay. I think it's the one that I want. Okay. So let's go ahead and we'll do overlay. And we are going to look at a bunch of different ones. Now, for overlay, it does look a little bit faint to me. So what I want to do here is I want to modify my gradient. So I think I'm going to just redraw this gradient. And the cool thing is when you're working with, the gradient with a blending mode applied to it, you can actually see the visual effect of the blending mode in real time. So if I redraw my gradient, you can see how the color affects the leaves, right? So this is kind of what I want. I kind of want like a splash of all the colors on the leaves. Is kind of what I want to see. Okay. All right. So I have this overlay blending mode, which is causing the gradient on this layer to kind of look like the colors are being projected onto the leaves and actually also onto the color fill layer as well. You guys see how it's also affecting the color fill layer there? You guys see that? So blending modes affect all layers that are visible underneath the layer that has the blending mode. Okay. Now, the thing about blending modes is that they are non-destructive, okay? Because blending modes, you can remove them at any time and you can modify them at any time. They're not permanent, right? So if I wanted to get rid of a blending mode right here where it says overlay, well, I can click the drop-down arrow and I can just change it back to normal, right? In which case the blending mode is now gone. Okay. Oh, adjusting opacity is also non-destructive, right? Because if you modify the opacity, you can always change it back to 100%. You're not permanently changing your picture, okay? So blending modes and adjusting opacity, both of those are non-destructive techniques, okay? All right, let's go back to overlay here. So I want to go back to overlay. All right. Okay, so that's looking good. All right, so now we have this cool kind of projected effect on the leaves, right? But the problem here is it's also projecting onto the background, right? The yellow color fill background that we had created earlier. Let's say I didn't want that. Let's say I only wanted the gradient on the leaves, okay? So the way that we're going to fix this is we're going to use what we call a clipping mask, okay? A clipping mask is basically where you take a layer and that layer acts as a mask for another layer, right? Now, you guys remember I defined a mask in Photoshop as sort of like, something blocking out something else, right? Like you're hiding and you're revealing, right? So this layer with the leaves has a layer mask linked to it, right? So this layer mask is like a stencil. It's blocking out certain parts of this layer. Now, if I want this layer with its layer mask to act as a mask for the gradient, okay, the way to do that is to hold down the Option key or the Alt key if you're using Windows. So if you're using a Mac, it's going to be the Option key. Again, Windows, you're going to hold down the Alt key. And when you put your cursor in between these two layers, it will turn into the square with like a little arrow that's pointing down. You see that? So it looks like a little square with an arrow pointing down. Okay. So when it looks like that, if you click with your mouse, so I'm going to click, you'll notice that the top layer indents and then it points down to the layer that's underneath it. Okay. So right now it's kind of like we have kind of like a string of effect that's going on here. Okay. So this layer, right, is being affected by this layer, which is being affected by the mask, right? Remember, the mask is the stencil that's blocking out the white background here, revealing just the shape of the leaves, right? And then now the shape of the leaves is acting as a mask for this layer that's above. Do you guys see that? So notice that the gradient is no longer affecting that yellow background over here. Okay. Now, clipping masks are also non-destructive. Okay. So if you want to get rid of a clipping mask, well, hold down the Option key or the Alt key, hover in between the two layers, and then when you click, look at that, it releases the clipping mask. Do you guys see that? And so now we no longer have the clipping mask affecting, the gradient. Okay. So hold down Option or Alt if you're using Windows, and then click to create the clipping mask, just like that. Okay. All right. So any questions? Any questions about that?
How do you get to the point where you don't have a layer selected?
Oh, you can just click anywhere. So I have this like empty space down here. You just click on it, and then it's not selecting any layer.
Ah, okay.
Great. Okay. So, all right. So clipping masks. Again, to be able to create a clipping mask, the two layers that are interacting, they have to be adjacent. Okay. There can't be any layers in between them. So they have to be next to each other. And then the layer that's getting clipped, that's basically getting cut, needs to sit on top. And then the layer that's doing the clipping, the layer that's going to act as the stencil, needs to sit directly underneath it. Okay. All right. And that's the clipping mask. So the clipping mask, again, allows you to cut things out of, a certain layer. It also allows you to restrict the effect of a layer, kind of like this gradient when it was affecting everything else. Here we've essentially restricted it just to the leaves layer. Okay. All right. So is that clear? Any questions? Any final questions here about what we've done here? Okay, I know I've introduced a lot of concepts right now just in one part of the lesson here. Don't worry, I don't think I introduced anything new. I guess I do. I talk about curves later, which is kind of new. But other than that, as like, like major functions, I'm not going to be introducing anything else new. We're just going to look at other sort of scenarios where we might use blending modes and clipping masks and other things, right? So we'll look at them in other kind of scenarios, but don't feel overwhelmed. I don't think I'm introducing anything else new in this, in today's lesson. Okay. All right. So, all right. So we've done a lot here. Now, if you guys want to save this, you certainly can. You go to File, you can do Save As. And then I might just rename this. I don't know. I might call it Blending Mode Lesson if you want. And then we're going to go ahead and then we're just going to click save there. Save it. All right. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and close this out. We're done with this. And now let's continue looking at blending modes and other scenarios in which you might use blending modes. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead. Let's open up the next image that we're going to be working with. So I'm going to do Command or Control O here to go ahead and open. And the next file that we want is this 3keys.jpg. So 3keys.jpg. Okay. All right, let's go ahead. We'll click open. All right. All right, so here I have a photograph with 3 keys. Okay, now what we're going to be doing is we're going to be painting these keys or filling them in with color. Okay. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to create a new layer on top, apply a blending mode, and then use our brush to paint in the color that we want. Okay. So let's go ahead. Let's create a new layer. So in my layers panel, it's my layers panel right here. Let's go ahead. We're going to move our cursor down to the new layer icon. It's a little square with the plus sign right in the center. Let's go ahead and click on it. All right, so here's my new layer 1. Now let's go ahead and rename this layer. So this layer 1, I'm going to double click on it. And I'm going to call this keys colors. Right, so these are going to be the colors of the keys. Right, so keys colors. Okay. All right. Okay, so at the moment, this layer is completely blank. Right, now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and apply a blending mode to it, even though there's nothing on this layer. Okay, now you guys remember blending modes. So right here where it says normal, right? It says normal at the moment. Let's go ahead and click the little drop down arrow. So I'm going to click the drop down arrow here. And the one that we want is multiply. Okay, so that's what we want here. So multiply, let's go ahead and select that. Okay. Okay, so multiply is one of these blending modes that's like based on mathematics, right? So so every single color in Photoshop has like a number assigned to it, right? We've kind of talked about these numbers, but we've kind of touched on them before, right? It's based on, a lot of times it's like based on that color's position around like the color wheel, right? Like red is like, sitting at like 0, right? Yellow is like at 56 or something, right? And green was, I forget, green's like at I don't know if it was at 120, well, whatever it is, right? Yeah, it might be at like 120 or something, right? So, okay, so we have all these different colors assigned, or all these different numbers assigned to different colors, okay? Now, black and white are kind of unique. Black is kind of like the number 0, and then white is kind of like the number 1, okay? So if you're multiplying colors, or doing any sort of multiplication with numbers, right? Any number multiplied by 0 gives you 0, right? So any color multiplied by black just gives you black, okay? White is like the number 1, So, any number multiplied by 1 gives you the other number, right? 3 times 1 gives you 3. 5 times 1 gives you 5, right? So any color multiplied by white gives you the other color. So when blue is multiplied by white, you get blue, right? So if we think about that, let's think about that. If you're dealing with a picture that's like a cartoon image or like something like, some sort of like logo or graphic or a comic book page, where you have black line work and then blank white paper, right? If we use this blending mode, it would make it really easy for us to go in and be able to colorize those type of images, right? So that's what we're going to do. So since we have this blending mode on there, we're going to be using the brush tool. Let's go ahead and select the brush tool. Keyboard shortcut, the letter B. B as in brush, B as in boy. Okay, make sure you have the brush tool here. And actually for this paint job that we're about to do, I don't want like a feathered edge. I don't want a soft edge to my brush. So let's go ahead. I'm going to click the little drop down arrow right here. I'm going to click the drop down arrow. And let's change the hardness of our brush to 100%. Okay. We're sort of going after like a Andy Warhol kind of pop art sort of style. So we don't want like a soft edge where it looks like we're spray painting it. We want it to sort of look like, we're applying sharp color and like with like sharp edges and it looks like screen printing or something. So that's kind of the look that we want. All right. All right. So what I want to do is I want to paint these keys. So I want to paint the first key. I want to paint it red. The second one, I'm going to paint it blue. And the third one, I'll paint it yellow. Right. And actually, I'm going to go backwards. I'm going to go from right to left. So I'm going to go yellow, blue, and then red. Okay. So let's go ahead. I'm going to select my color. And I'm going to do that using the color picker box, the foreground color picker box here. Let's click on it. All right, let's go and select yellow, like a nice yellow. Some nice yellow brush here. Okay, and I'm going to resize my brush. I'm going to hit the left bracket key here. And then I'm just going to start painting on this key, right? And you'll notice that the shadows on the keys remain, right? The textures on the keys remain. And it just kind of looks like we're applying color to the light areas. Now, you don't have to be too careful. You don't have to make it perfect. I mentioned Andy Warhol before. His paintings were pretty rough, done, relatively quickly. And he was famous for painting like the Campbell soup cans. He also had famous paintings of like Marilyn Monroe and Elvis. So that's kind of what we're kind of going for. So if you paint outside the lines, I wouldn't worry about it. Just kind of doing it really quick. So there's one key painted like that. All right, let's do the next key. So I said the next key is going to be blue, right? I'll go ahead and I'll choose like a nice blue color here. All right, and again, I'm just going to kind of quickly paint here. So one of the classes that I teach at a different institution is I teach digital illustration. And in that class, I show my students how to, create different types of graphics. But one of their assignments is they have to illustrate a story. And a lot of times my students, because they're into like things like comic books and, inspired by like children's books and stuff, they like to do sort of like traditional kind of line drawings that look cartoony, that look comic booky. And this is the way that they go in and then colorize their drawings. So they go in, create a layer on top, apply a blending mode, and then just paint to fill in the colors. All right, let's go ahead. I'm gonna do the last one. So the last key is gonna be red. So I'm gonna choose like a nice red color here. And sometimes you just have to be careful, when you're painting these type of things, you just gotta take your time. Just kind of be careful. So what I usually like to do is I like to trace the edge and then kind of go in and then kind of fill in the insides. But again, for this one, we don't have to worry too much. We're not gonna, obsess over getting our painting perfect or anything like that. All right, so go ahead and get the colors for the keys filled in here. All right. All right. Okay, so you guys notice, so with the new layer and the blending mode applied to it, when we painted, we were essentially filling in our picture or object here, kind of like how you would color in pictures in a coloring book, right? All right, so go ahead and finish up if you're still working. I'll give you another minute here to go ahead and put the finishing touches on it. All right. Okay, now that we're done, let's take a look at what we were actually doing. Okay, so what we're actually doing is we're painting solid colors on a layer on top, right? So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go ahead and remove the blending mode for now. So right up here where it says multiply, I'm gonna click the little drop down arrow and let's go and switch it back to normal. Okay. All right, so we know how the brush tool works, right? The brush tool by default, when you're painting with it, paints solid color, right? And so when we're painting over the shape of the key, notice that our marks are just solid color that completely blocks out the image of the keys. Like any details in the keys right now are completely blocked out, right? So it's the blending mode that allows for the relationship between the layers to change and for certain parts of the image underneath to show through. Okay. And like I said, most of the time, you just have to experiment to figure out which blending mode you want. Like you just kind of scroll down, you just try them all out. And if it gives you the result that you want, then that's the one that you go with, right? Some of them are unpredictable, other ones are a little more predictable, right? So multiply, like I mentioned, is a pretty predictable one, right? If you're dealing with images that have black and white in them, they're pretty predictable, right? So any part that's white will change to any color that's sitting, on top. And then anything that's black will be the color that shows through, right? Other ones that are predictable, like darken is actually a predictable one. With darken, what it does is it looks at the layer that has the blending mode on it, and then any layers underneath, and whichever pixels or whichever layer is darker, that's the thing that's going to be seen. That's the thing that's going to show through, right? So with this picture, the part that's like red, right? That's light. And so where where it's white, because the red is darker, we see the red, right? But where the black shadow is, since that is darker, well, that's what we see, right? Versus something like lighten, which is the opposite, right? So when it's comparing the pixels, whichever pixel is lighter, that's the pixel that's going to be visible, right? So we have the picture of the keys, wherever the red was, right? White is lighter, so we see the white. And then where the shadows are, right? Because the red is lighter than the shadow, while we see the red there. Do you guys see that? And then we can kind of keep going and just kind of see, some of the other results. Like I said, some of them are kind of unpredictable and some of them do kind of wild things. Like this hard mix gives you almost like a posterized kind of effect. Look at difference. Like difference almost kind of looks almost like an inverted sort of color situation. Exclusion. I mean, some of these are just really out there. Right. All right.
The color burn looks on the mode burn looks really cool.
Oh, yeah, you're right. That does look really cool.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Kind of a metallic feel to it.
Yeah, it
Very
really
nice.
brings out that texture, the textures and the keys. Uh-huh.
Mhm.
Yeah, oh, totally. All right. Great. Yeah, and any other questions about this? All right. Okay. All right, so that's what I wanted to show you guys with this particular image. So feel free if you want to save this, you certainly can. I'm gonna go ahead and just close out of this. I'm just gonna hit a little X there, and then we're gonna say don't save on that. Okay. All right, so blending modes, right? So we've seen blending modes can be used to overlay gradients. You can use it to overlay color, like what we just did with the keys. You can also use it to overlay textures, right? And it's actually a really cool way of giving images that sort of like filtered kind of look, right? You know, like certain apps will do this, will make images look like they have, you know, like scratches on them or make them look vintagey or something, right? So that's what we're going to look at next. So let's go ahead. Let's open up the next image. So I'm going to do Command or Control O. O is an open. All right. And the picture that we want is going to be this women.jpg. So women.jpg. Let's go ahead and then we'll click open on it. All right. All right. So here it is. So we have this picture here. Now, obviously, this is like a modern picture, contemporary image. We can, well, see a person holding what looks like a phone, right? So taking a picture with like an iPhone or something. We have modern cars behind them. We have modern sort of dressed people in the background, but we do have these two women who are, you know, dressed up in like vintagey sort of costumes, right? So I was thinking with an image like this, it might be just fun or interesting to apply some sort of vintagey sort of texture to this picture and then give the image the look of like you know, a photograph that maybe was printed using like an antiquated sort of technique, like a daguerreotype or you know, one of those sort of images. Okay. All right, so the way that we're going to do this is we're going to take a texture and we're going to place it over this picture. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So the way we're going to place it is we're going to use the place embedded function. Okay, so let's go ahead. We're going to go up to File. We're going to come down to Place Embedded. So here we are at Place Embedded. Let's go ahead and click on it. All right, and the image that we want is this vintage texture.jpg. So that's what we want. So vintage texture.jpg. Okay. All right, and let's go ahead. We're going to click place. So we're going to go ahead and place it. All right, so here it is. So it's placing our image. Now, you guys remember when you do place embedded, it lets you transform this picture immediately, like right off the bat. If you want to scale this or even like rotate it, you can. So what we want to do here is we want to scale it up so that it completely fills the canvas. It completely fills the picture. Okay, so I'm going to take my cursor here and I'm going to move it up to the upper left corner. So I'm going to line it up to the upper left corner. And then I'm going to take my cursor and I'm going to put it in the bottom right corner of the texture image. Okay, so I'm in the bottom right corner. Now I'm going to drag away. So I'm going to click and drag away from the picture and just I'm dragging it up. I'm scaling it. Okay. Now you guys notice as I'm dragging it, as I'm scaling it, Photoshop is keeping the proportions of this image locked to the original. Okay. Now this is typically a good thing, right? This is good because, you know, if we're creating a collage and we had a picture of a person or, you know, an object, you know, you probably wouldn't want to, you know, like, it's likely that you wouldn't want to warp that object, right? Like you wouldn't want a person to look like they're stretched out. Okay, so this is typically a good thing. Okay, but in this case, since we're dealing with a texture, you know, and I don't think anyone would really notice if this texture was like, you know, warped or anything like that. And I just want it to stretch so that it perfectly fits this picture because I like the border that's contained in the texture. Like, I don't want to just go bigger. You know, that border is going to get cut out, right? Or a portion of it's going to get cut out. I want it to line up to the edge of this photograph. So what we're going to do is we're going to hold down the Shift key on our keyboard. So when you hold down the Shift key, it temporarily releases the constraint, right? Like that's keeping the proportions locked. And now I can stretch this so that it fits my picture like that. Okay. All right. And then I can go ahead and let go of my mouse click and then let go of the Shift key after that. Okay. All right. So again, I won't do this. I won't stretch things that are like pictures or, you know, objects that are recognizable. If I'm editing, you know, like textures, patterns, things maybe where it doesn't quite matter, like like text or something, then I'll hold down shift and I'll just kind of like stretch it. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and hit return or enter on our keyboard to go ahead and apply the placement of this picture. Okay. So you guys remember when you do the place embedded function, it places it as a smart object. So notice in this, in my layers panel here, vintage texture, I didn't have to rename the layer, right? It already has the name from the picture. And then there's the little thumbnail there in that layer telling me that this is a smart object. Okay. So since this picture is a smart object, or since this layer or object is a smart object, I can apply non-destructive techniques to it. Right? And you guys remember, blending modes are non-destructive, right? So I can apply blending modes to smart objects. So let's go ahead. What we're going to do is we're going to just sort of, I'm just going to show you guys how I would go through this process of figuring out which blending mode to select. Okay, so right over here where it says normal, I'm going to click the little drop-down arrow, and I'm just going to scroll down. And I'm just going to see which ones look good, and we'll kind of like note to ourselves which blending modes look good, right? Like multiply looks okay. Like multiply is certainly a candidate here. Looks good. Color burn might be a little too intense. Linear burn, no. Darker colors, maybe. Lighten, no. Screen, no, no, no. Lighter colors, no. Okay, now here's a promising one. Overlay certainly could work. I think that looks good. So, I had multiply, which maybe is a little more intense, right? So multiply has a tendency to go darker because remember, black is going to be the part that's going to show through, right? And so, when you're doing multiply, if you have, pictures that are, relatively dark, the picture overall is going to go darker. So I think multiply is okay. Overlay doesn't have that issue, so that looks fine. Soft light, no. Okay, here's another option. Hard light actually looks kind of cool, right? I can see the texture come through. The picture doesn't look too dark, and and the picture's still realistic looking, so I think that looks pretty good. So I'm probably between overlay or hard light. Vivid light. I mean, vivid light is certainly an option. I think I still prefer hard light. Linear light, wow. If you want like a really intense kind of effect, linear light is an option. Pin light, no. And if I keep going down, I mean, if I wanted a negative or something that looks, like out of a nightmare or like, some other universe or something, I could do difference, exclusion, no, no. All right, and the rest of these, we're just getting further and further away. Okay. All right, so I'm thinking if I just want something a little more subtle, I might go with like overlay. And then if I want something that's a little more intense, I think hard light or even vivid light actually looks good. But I think I would probably go with hard light, right? And it's just a matter of personal preference. Whatever it is that you're trying to go after, the look that you're trying to go after, you would just choose the blending mode that works for that. Okay. All right. So any questions? Any questions about what we just did here? All right. So you guys remember blending modes, again, are non-destructive. So at any point, if you change your mind and you want to do something else, like, you decide, oh, what, maybe I do want to go something more subtle. I could always do overlay, right? Or here's another trick. If there is an intense one that you really like linear light, for example, right? So let's say you like linear light, but it's just too intense, okay? What you can do is you can turn down the opacity on the layer with the blending mode. So this layer, if I turn down the opacity on it, let's try that. If I turn down the opacity, this layer is becoming more see-through, right? And so the effect of it is not going to be as intense, right? So here's what it looks like turned down 50%. Right? So it kind of has some of the vintagey kind of effects, right? But it's not as intense. 50% might even be too low. I think it looks good. I mean, I could even say it looks good at like 70% or something. Right? So that's another option. So you could apply your blending mode, and then you could always turn down the opacity on the blending mode or on the layer with the blending mode. Okay. All right. Okay, so any questions about that? All right. Okay. All right, so I'm looking at the time here. So right now we're at 8 o'clock, and this is when I usually like to give you guys a break. So let's go ahead. Oh, are you guys still there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm
okay.
trying to save this one.
Oh yeah, but sorry. For some reason, when I unshared there, like my Zoom got
We're too
hit.
quiet.
Yeah. All right, so I was just gonna type in the chat. So okay, so we'll go ahead and we'll take our 10-minute break until 8:11. Okay. All right, so
Okay.
I'll see you guys in 10 minutes. Okay.
Sure.
All right. Welcome back, everybody. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead. Let's get back into it. I'm gonna reshare my screen here. Okay. All right. Okay, so we're done. We're done with this picture. So let's go ahead. I'm just gonna go ahead and close it. Again, feel free to save this if you want. I'm just gonna go ahead and close it. Okay, so I've shown you guys that we can use blending modes to overlay gradients. We've overlaid color. We've overlaid textures. Another thing you can do is you can just take you can take an image and just overlay it over another image. So let's take a look at that. So we're gonna go ahead and open up the next picture. I'm gonna use Command or Control O. O is an open. And the next picture that we want is gonna be this towel.jpg. So towel.jpg is the image that we want. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and click open. Go ahead and open it. All right, so here I have a picture of a towel here. And if I want
Jerry,
to, yes.
sorry. I have a question because you've talked about overlays and backgrounds, and I think you can do both. You can use this both background and overlay to create the same or similar effects. Am I wrong?
Uh, I'm not sure what you mean. So overlay
So
and
if you want to have a background, the first thing we did today was we opened up and started from scratch and put a color into it.
uh-huh.
And then we ended up with a picture with a color background that we can modify it or create gradients, whatever, if we wanted to. The second one is an overlay that at the end ends up being sort of a background, depending how, well, we used more transparently now that I think about it. But I was just thinking if you make it more opaque, can you do the same thing or not? Or I think
Uh,
I'm confusing myself here.
Okay, so the background, like when you're creating a background, yeah, the background is it can either be a solid color, a gradient, or even like even a picture that you're just putting in the
Mhm.
back of, your collage or your composite image, right? I think of the blending mode as I think you kind of described it as this. It's kind of like colored glass or textured glass that's sitting on top that
I see.
affects the
Mhm.
overall look of the image.
But it doesn't take the background away. Yeah, I see. I get it. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, so I think the important thing to know about that is that it affects everything that's underneath it. So you apply the blending mode to a specific layer, and most of the
Yeah.
time it's going to be the layer that's sitting on top, and then visually it affects all layers underneath, including the background.
And also the main. Yeah. Okay. Yes, I get it. Thank you.
Okay. Oh yeah, you're welcome. Okay, so right now we have this picture here of like a towel. And if I wanted to take a picture of like a pattern or something or some sort of interesting image, I could place it on top and then use a blending mode on it. right? So let's go ahead and do that. So we're gonna go ahead and use the place embedded function. So I'm gonna go to File. Let's go down to Place Embedded. And also notice, I like to encourage you guys to use keyboard shortcuts whenever you can. But Place Embedded is just a function that just doesn't, there's no keyboard shortcut for it. So you do have to manually go to File and then go down to Place Embedded. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and click on it. All right, so the image that we're going to be placing is going to be the autumn leaves.jpg is what we want. So autumn leaves.jpg. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and then we'll click place to go ahead and place the image. Okay. All right, so here I have a picture of like a bunch of leaves. And basically what I want to do right now is I want to be able to resize this image so that it completely covers the towel. Okay, because we want to overlay the leaves so that they look like they're printed on the towel. Okay. Now, right now, you'll notice that the autumn leaves picture is landscape. And the picture with the towel is more portrait, even though it is kind of close to a square, it is kind of like more portrait. Okay. So one of the things I want to do here is I want to rotate the leaves so that they're more like aligned with the towel. Okay. So the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to take my cursor and I'm going to put it outside of the bounding box, right? The transformation box that's here. And you'll see it becomes this curved double-headed arrow, right? Well, when you click and drag with your mouse, it allows you to rotate it freely, right? Like I can rotate to whatever degree I want. So I can sit, at whatever angle I want the picture to be. Now, if I want to lock it to certain increments when I'm rotating, you can do that by holding down the shift key. So if you hold down the shift key, it only allows you to rotate it at, I guess it kind of looks like 15-degree increments, right? And this will really help, like when I want to put it at exactly 90 degrees, like it helps me to just land right there, just like that. Okay. All right. So I let go of my mouse click first, and then I let go of the shift key. And then after that, I can go ahead and scale this if I want. So I can scale it up so it's a lot bigger. And basically, I just want this picture big enough so that it completely covers the towel. Okay. And the reason for that, or the reason we don't care about completely covering this picture, is the blending mode that we're going to be using. When you have white, it just completely ignores any images that sit over white. So there has to be some other value for you to be able to see the image through. Okay, so we just need to be able to completely cover the towel is all we need. Okay. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and hit return or enter on my keyboard here to go ahead and apply the the placement of this picture. Okay. All right, and then now all we need to do is just apply the blending mode to the autumn leaves layer. Okay, now a common mistake that I'll see students do is they'll apply the blending mode to the picture that's underneath, right? Oh, now, I mean, the background layer here is like locked, so you can't even apply it, but if you had multiple layers, sometimes I'll see students try to apply it to a layer that's underneath. And the problem with that is then, the opaque layer sitting on top, right? And it'll just continue to block out anything that's underneath it. So you won't see the effect of applying it. Like if let's say I unlock this right now, and then I apply a blending mode to the towel, right? You're not gonna see anything, right? Because the towel is getting blended to, well, nothing underneath it, but the opaque leaves on top just continue to block it out. So you don't want to accidentally do that. So you always apply the blending mode to the layer that's on top. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and click on autumn leaves. And the blending mode, the specific blending mode that we want is color burn on this one. I think this is the one that Victoria earlier kind of like mentioned. Yeah, just looks really cool.
So cool. Yeah.
Yeah, especially with the texture of the towel and everything. Like, yeah, it looks really
Yeah.
all right, and there it is. It just really is that simple. So that's the cool thing about blending modes. Like they're so easy to apply, but they're really powerful. And we'll see in the next part of the lesson how you can use blending modes to just like bring your compositions and bring everything together. Right?
Yeah. And what is interesting, if you go down and use difference or exclusion or one of those, it goes into
Oh, yeah.
blues. It changes completely the colors if you go all the way almost down.
Oh yeah, and some of these are kind of interesting too. Like some of these other ones, I mean, they look a little bit fainter, but you're saying, oh yeah, like,
Look
let's
at that.
now in this situation, if you know, if you wanted, let's say, to use difference, right? And notice that difference here does project onto the white background. In that case, then you would need to, you know, make a selection of the towel, apply a blending mode to it, and then use a clipping mask. That way, it then doesn't project onto the background. And then you would get a much cleaner kind of effect on the towel.
Wow.
But yeah, really interesting. Oh, like that one.
Yeah, look at that.
So yeah,
Nice.
some really cool effects. So yeah, blend. So but this is great because blending modes, again, you know, a lot of times you figure out which blending mode to use just by experimenting, right? Just kind of looking at it. And you may, you know, over time kind of develop go-to blending modes for certain situations, but you know, everyone just kind of just tries them all out. Yeah. So great. Okay. Any other comments, any other questions or anything about this? All right. Yeah, actually, I like this. This looks pretty cool. All right.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's go ahead. We'll close this out. Feel free to save it if you want. I'm gonna go ahead and say don't save on this. Okay. All right. Okay. So the next part of our lesson, what we're gonna do is we're gonna take all of the skills that we've acquired up to this point, all the non-destructive skills, we're going to use them to create two different movie posters together. Okay. Like in the past, I used to just do one movie poster and the students loved it. And they're like, oh, are there other scenarios in which you could use these skills? And then I came up with another one that I thought looked kind of cool. So we'll do two. Okay. All right. So if we were going to design a movie poster, like an actual movie poster, right, I would start by creating a new document, right? So Command or Control N is in new, N is in Nancy. Okay. And if you're actually going to be printing out this movie poster, then you would design it to its full size, right? So like a standard movie poster is something like 24 by like 36 inches. It's pretty standard size for like a movie poster, right? Now we're not going to do that because you know, that would be such a big file. And you know, if you have an older computer, or, you know, like a slightly slower computer, working with a document that big could just really slow things down. So for our lesson, we're just going to sort of mock it up at a smaller size. But I just want to mention that if you are going to be designing something specific that you know that you're going to be printing, then you want to design it to that specific size. Okay. For us, though, we're going to go ahead and just use the print preset. You know, that's what we've sort of been using for a lot of our lessons. So we're going to go to the print preset here, and I'm gonna go ahead and choose letter size, which is 8.5 by 11 inches. So this mocked up movie poster that we're creating would actually be sized so that if you wanted to print it on a standard sheet of printer paper, it would be the correct size. So, all right, let's go ahead and then we'll click create, and then we'll create it. Okay. All right. So, okay. So a standard movie poster will usually have, you know, like a large picture of the actors in the film, right? Because they're the main selling point for your film. So you want them large and centered. So we have, you know, an image of, you know, a couple actors. We're going to put them centered, and then we're also going to incorporate an image that, you know, communicates something about the film, right? Like maybe a picture from an important scene or an object that represents something that takes place in the film. Okay. And you guys will see this movie poster is going to be relatively simple, right? We're just really going to be, it's going to collage together two images with a bunch of like effects. But you know, even with so few objects, you can still create something that can be pretty dynamic. So, all right, so let's go ahead. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna bring in the picture of our actors. Okay, so we're gonna go to File. Let's go down to Place Embedded. So we're doing Place Embedded here. And we're gonna bring in screenshot.jpg. So that's the image we want. So screenshot.jpg. Okay. And then let's go ahead. We'll click Place. Let's click Place here. All right, so here we have a picture of two actors. Now, I designed this movie poster many years ago for this lesson. And what I just did was I you know, it was years ago. This is like a long time ago. And I just Googled, you know, pick like actors, I think, and I just got a whole bunch of different image results on Google Images. And this one just like looked interesting. And then I found out the source of this picture. So if you guys recognize this, these are the two actors from a film called The Lucky One. Okay, so, and yes, that is Zac Efron on the right there. What we're gonna do is we're gonna go and scale this picture up so it's really big. Okay. Now, if you want to know sort of like a reference to the size that I want it, I basically want it to cover or fill 3/4 of my canvas. Okay. So, you know, if we're sort of dividing the page in half and then visually dividing the page in half again, right? This extra white space is just 1/4 of the page, right? So something kind of like that. Or I might even shift it down a little bit. So don't be afraid to go big, okay? And we want our actors to really fill the frame. Like I want them to basically be like back to back against like the edge of the canvas like that, okay? And also be careful the top of their heads too. Like you don't want the top of his head hitting the top of the canvas. Okay. So just give it a little bit of space. So something kind of like that. Okay. And again, if you divide it in half and then half again, that's how much extra space we have at the bottom here. Okay. All right. Once you're done with the sizing and the placement of it, go ahead and hit return or enter on your keyboard to go ahead and place the image just like that. Okay. Oh, I guess I had the brush. All right. So something like that. Or I can even, you know, double click the hand tool just to resize this so that it fills my screen like that. Okay. All right. So right down here, so my layer here has the name of the picture. So it's screenshot. Let's go ahead and double click on that. Let's go ahead and rename this and I'll call it I don't know, actors, maybe. All right, let's go ahead and bring in the next picture. So the next picture represents something that takes place in the film. Okay, so again, we're going to use the place embedded function. So I'm going to go to File. Let's go down to Place Embedded. We want Place Embedded. And then the image that we're looking for is going to be the observatory.jpg. So observatory.jpg. And then we're going to go ahead and click Place here. All right, so it places the image. Now, if you've ever seen the film, or I guess if you haven't seen the film, or I guess it's based on a Nicholas Sparks novel. Basically the premise of the film and the story, the lucky one is that there's you know, a person that goes off to war. You know, he experiences some significant loss over there. And then he comes back home sort of haunted by those experiences, right? And I think the title kind of clues you in that, you know, from his troop, he was like the lucky one, right? He's the one that made it home. And so when I was coming up with like, you know, a design for this movie poster, I was like, oh, you know, like maybe a picture of soldiers marching or something, or, you know, people lined up in a row. Like that would be, you know, kind of an interesting image to represent that aspect of the story, right? Like him being at war. So I just happened to find this image online many years ago. And I think it's some sort of like, I don't know, some sort of temple or observatory or something. And so, you know, we're just using it as a sort of stand-in to represent the story. So let's go ahead. What I'm going to do is I'm going to place this at the bottom here. And I actually have the building sort of sitting on one side, kind of like that. And then I'm going to go and scale it up pretty big. Now, we do want this overlap. Okay, so we want the pictures to overlap significantly. Okay, so I sort of have the building on one side and then the sunset on the other, kind of like that, with this pretty significant overlap of the two pictures. So we need this picture to block out a good portion of this picture. All right. I guess if you're sort of trying to figure out in terms of size, this extra space above is about, I don't know, like 1/3 of the page, right? So we divided the page into 3 sections. The observatory picture kind of takes up 2/3 of the canvas like that. Okay. All right, let's go ahead. We'll hit return right here to go ahead and place the image just like so. Okay. All right. Okay, let's go ahead and rename this layer too. So this layer is called observatory. So I'm gonna go ahead and double click on it. Let's go ahead. I guess this would be like the action shot or something. Right. So we have a layer with the picture of our actors, and then we have this layer with like, like an action shot or the action shot. Okay. All right. Okay, so our design here for the movie poster is just going to be these two images. And basically what we want is we want this sort of ghostly picture where it kind of looks like our actors are fading into the sky. So that's the look that we're going to try to achieve here. Okay. And we're going to be using like techniques or approaches that we've already learned, right? We're not going to use any other skills other than the ones that we've, talked about today. Okay. All right, so let's think about this. So right now I have this action shot layer, and it's sitting on top of the picture of my actors, right? So in terms of the layering, right, action shot is on top, actors is underneath it. Now the actual position on, if we're looking at it on the page vertically, right? Obviously the actors are above, and then the action shot is lower down on the page, right? But what really matters is the order in terms of the layers. Okay, now let's go ahead. I'm going to hide the action shot picture for a moment. Okay, so what we're looking at here, if I hide one and reveal the other, there's some extra space above here, right? The action shot picture, there's extra space above. And then in the picture with the actors, there's some extra space underneath. But there's this space where the two pictures overlap. Okay, now this is important, right? So if you're going to be doing this technique that I'm going to show you, or this trick that I'm going to show you, and you're designing something, to be able to get this to work, your two pictures have to overlap. Now, the space that they overlap doesn't have to be great. Like, there doesn't have to be a lot of space, right? But the blending can only happen in the space in which they overlap. Okay. So our blending is going to go from where this picture is, from here down to here. It can't go past it. Okay. And I'll show you guys why that is in a moment. Okay. So what I want to do is I want to create a blend visually from this picture into this picture. Okay. So let's think about that. So I want to keep the ground, I want to keep the people, and I want to keep the observatory completely opaque, right? Like I want those parts of the picture to be solid, but I want it to fade more and more as we get higher and higher up into the picture, into the sky. Okay. So the way that we're going to achieve that is we're going to use a layer mask, right? Because this is a smart object. Both of these pictures are smart objects, right? So if I want to block out any part of this observatory picture, then we're going to have to use a non-destructive technique on it, right? And layer masks are non-destructive. So let's go ahead, make sure that you have action shot, the action shot layer selected. And then I'm going to come down here to my layers panel. And at the very bottom, I'm going to select the icon for layer mask. Now, you guys remember the layer mask icon is like the rectangle with the circle, dark circle in the center of it. It's the third icon from the left. If you hover over it, it should say layer masks. Let's go ahead and click on it. Okay, so you guys remember when we were working with layer masks, right? If you have an active selection going, when you create the layer mask, your layer mask will match up to the shape of your selection, right? Here, since we didn't have any selection, when we created the layer mask, our layer mask is completely blank, okay? So my whole layer mask at the moment is completely white, which means every part of this picture is currently showing through, right? Every part of this picture is visible, okay? Now, you guys remember, if you paint with a black brush anywhere on a layer mask, that's going to get blocked out, right? You guys remember? So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to show you. If you grab the brush tool, keyboard shortcut, the letter B, B as in boy, B as in brush, okay? And, if I make my brush black, I'm gonna go and make it a black brush. And actually, I'm gonna zoom in so you guys can see a little bit better here. Now look what happens when I paint with a black brush. So when I paint with a black brush, it completely blocks out, right, from the image. You guys can see where I painted. You can see a representation of that in my layer mask, right? Like if I wrote my initials, right? There's J and then T, right, on the picture. And look at that. You can see the JT right there in the layer mask. Okay. So painting with black completely blocks out, right? You guys are painting with white, again, reveals from your image. So painting with white completely reveals. And I'd said before in a previous lesson that when you're working with layer masks, you can only paint with black and white, right? Black to block out, white to reveal. Okay. While that is technically true, right? You can paint with black and white, while you can also paint with other shades of black and white, right? Or at different values. So you can actually paint gray in your layer mask. Now let's take a look. So here's a line that's completely black. Let me paint a black line here. So black completely blocks out, right? Now I'm gonna go ahead and click in my color picker box here. And I'm going to choose a gray that's still relatively dark. So this is a gray where the brightness is only 25%. Okay, so 25% brightness on this. And here's what this gray looks like. And actually, let me cross over to where the building is, so you guys can see. Notice that we can see a faint like a ghosted sort of image of the building here, right? Or of like the people. You guys see that? So here's what it looks like at 25%. Okay. All right, let me go ahead. I'm going to change this. I'm going to click on my color picker here. Let's go to 50% so we can see that. So at 50%, like that. Okay, so at 50%, we're getting closer and closer to white. Now remember, white is allowing everything in this observatory or action shot picture to show through, right? So basically at 50%, you can see more of the original image. So notice the people here look more faded with the lower percentage. At a higher percentage of brightness, you can see more of the picture on top. Let's keep going here. So if I go up here to like, let's say 75% brightness, you can see the people are not as faded. Notice this person's a lot darker, right? This one's way lighter. And then finally, if you go to pure white, right, at 100% brightness, well, everything shows through. Look at that. If I paint this, it doesn't look like anything's getting blocked out, right? Everything's getting revealed. Okay. So think of the brightness of the gray, the level of like, the light or dark levels of the gray as a way of adjusting opacity, right? So the lower the brightness, the darker the gray, the more is getting blocked out on your layer. The higher the brightness, the lighter the gray, the less of your picture is getting blocked out. Okay. All right. So any questions about that? So on our picture here, different levels of gray adjusts the opacity of the image on top. Okay. Now I'm going to go ahead and undo all this in my history. So we're back here. So this is where you guys are at, right? So we're like here. So let's think about that. Okay. So earlier in the lesson, I showed you guys how to create gradients, right? So we can create a gradient that has one color on one end and transitions to another color on the other end. So if I create a gradient in my layer mask, it will allow me to transition from white, right, at the bottom, which will allow this whole picture to appear, to complete black on top where it's blocking things at the very top, right? And then I'll have a transition, right, a gradient, a gradation in between, okay? All right, so let's go ahead. Let's make sure that we have our layer mask selected here, okay? Now let's go and select our gradient tool. I'm gonna hit the letter G. G is in gradient. G is in Greg. Now, we're going to select one of the preset gradients. Okay, so right up here, this is the gradient that we created earlier, right? The one that goes from red to blue to yellow. Well, let's click the little drop-down arrow, okay? And I'm going to scroll all the way back up to the top here under Basics, okay? And the gradient that we're looking for is the one that goes from black to white. Okay, now it's usually the one that's on the far right. So if you hover over it, it should say black, comma, white. Okay, let's go and click and select that one. Okay. All right. I'll hit return there just to, make that selection just like that. Okay. All right. Okay, so when we're drawing this gradient, okay, I have to be mindful of where the bottom of this picture is. And actually, I don't really want to go past where the building is because I don't want the building to fade away, right? So any fading or, sort of transition, I want it to only take place in the sky, okay? Now, you guys remember, black is where it's getting blocked out completely, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start my gradient right here, somewhere underneath this edge. Okay, so this edge right here, right, where the action shot picture is, I'm starting underneath this edge, right below it, okay? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag with my mouse to create a gradient, right? And I want it to be a vertical gradient. You don't want it to be at an angle, okay? And I want my gradient to end before I get to the bottom, or I get to, I'm sorry, the top of the building. So I want it to stop right about here. Now, if you don't like your gradient tool swinging like this and you want it to be perfectly vertical, you can hold down the shift key. And if you hold down the shift key, it will lock it to certain positions, rotating at 15-degree increments. And this will help you to get a perfectly vertical line. Okay. And I'm going to stop it just right about here, like that. Do you guys see that? Now, let me show you guys what happens if you start your gradient too high or if you draw your gradient too low. Okay, so let me show you guys. So here's what happens. So if I start my gradient, let me undo it. If I start my gradient above this edge, above here, and actually I'm just going to exaggerate it so it's a lot more obvious. So if I go up here and then draw it down, look at this. Do you guys see? I'm going to see a ghosted version of that edge, right? Because remember, black completely blocks out, right? So whatever is here, which is blank anyways, that's completely blocked out. But since this is like getting to become like a lighter gray and it's getting lighter and lighter as we move down, it's no longer blocking out that edge, right? And so you see this line here, which just doesn't look good. So that's why we're starting our gradient below that line. Okay, so below it just like that. Okay. Now, here's what happens if you go too far. So if you start going down, well, I mean, you're going to get fading of these objects, and we don't want that. We don't want those parts of the picture to look ghostly. And then we also don't want to reveal the bottom edge of the picture with the actors, right? So we don't want that edge. So that's why you want this overlap, and our blending is only happening where the overlap is. Okay. Now, the next movie poster that we're going to create together, the overlap is going to be a very small space. It's going to be very, very narrow. And you guys will see how we'll make that work. Okay, but for this one, again, I'm going to start right here, right where the edges are slightly below the edge, and then holding down shift. And, Photoshop showing us the effect of the gradient on the layer mask in real time. This is actually something that Adobe changed a couple of years ago. It used to be you would draw the gradient, and then after you created the gradient, you would then see the effect on the layer mask. But a couple years ago, they made this change where you see it in real time. I'm still on the fence whether I think it's better or not. But now you can see it as you're drawing the gradient. Okay. All right. So any questions? Any questions about that?
No, this is pretty cool.
All right. I'm glad. Okay. So right now we have our kind of new composite image, right? We have this gradient creating this effect where it's kind of like our two people are fading into the sky, right? But the image doesn't feel cohesive yet, right? And this is actually a very common issue where, you create, a collage. But the problem is there are too many colors, different objects have different values to them. And so the picture doesn't feel cohesive, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to go in and we're going to use some of the techniques that we've talked about to make everything feel more cohesive, okay? All right, so the first thing I want to do is I want to tint everything the same color. Okay, that's going to help make everything look like they're existing in the same world together. All right, so let's go ahead. I'm going to click to the top layer. So the action shot layer here. Okay. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a fill layer. Okay, so I'm going to come down here to my layers panel to the bottom. We're going to go ahead and click on the circle there, the slash through it. And notice when you hover over it, it says create a new fill or adjustment layer, right? So new fill or adjustment layer. I'm going to click on it. And let's go ahead and select solid color at the top here. So right up here, we have solid color. Let's click on that. All right, so now I'm going to pick a color here. And what I'm going to pick is like a nice orange. Okay, kind of like a nice sunsetty sort of like orange. Maybe a little bit more on the saturated side. Something kind of like that. Okay. Just like a nice color like that. Let me see. Do I want it? Yeah, something kind of like that. I think looks good. All right. And then once you're happy with your selection, we can go ahead and click OK. So I'll click OK here, and then it's going to apply that color change. Okay. Or the color selection. All right. Now, don't worry. After you've seen after you see the result, if you want to go in and change the color, you have the option to do that. So we're not locked into anything because everything that we're doing right now is all non-destructive. Okay, now at the moment, my color fill layer is completely opaque, right? So it's blocking out the action shot and the actors layer underneath. So I can't see anything at the moment, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and apply a blending mode to it. So make sure that you have the color fill layer selected. And then I'm going to come right up here to where it says normal, little bar right here, my blending mode. And I'm going to click the little drop down arrow. And the blending mode that we want for this one is it's near the bottom. It's actually the second one from the bottom. So we're selecting color. Okay. Now, color is one that I actually use pretty often. I like it quite a bit. And I mainly use it when I want to tint a picture, just like, basically make a picture like a single color, So basically what it does is it takes the color of the layer on top and it brings up the various values of the layers underneath, right? So let's go, we'll select color here. And there it is. So now everything in our picture is being tinted the same color, okay? All right, so that's looking pretty good. Now, it doesn't quite feel cohesive yet because there's too much depth in the picture on top, right? The picture with our actors, there's like this area behind their heads where it's like really light, right? It's really too bright. The shadows in his hair is just like too dark because you can see here the way that the sky sort of looks, like the sky is kind of flat, right? Now, I mean, obviously we have a silhouette here, but we want them to sort of look like they're blending into the sky. So because there's too much depth here, it just doesn't quite make sense visually. So I'm going to show you guys a way where we can go in and then we can adjust the values in this picture to make things match up a little bit better. Okay. All right. So what we want to do is we want to change the way that the actors layer looks. So let's go ahead and click on the actors layer. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to do this using an adjustment layer. You guys remember adjustment layers are non-destructive, right? So to create an adjustment layer, and there are a couple ways you can do that. You can do it down here where the layers panel is. You click on this and you could select the adjustment layer that you want. So you could certainly do that. That's an option. Or you can come up to your adjustments tab where you can, select the adjustment that you want. So either way is fine. The adjustment that we want is curves. That's the one that we want. Okay. Now I've already shown you guys a couple different ways to adjust values in your pictures, right? Before we go into curves, I'm just gonna, do a quick review of some of the other ones, right? You guys remember brightness contrast was an option. Brightness contrast gives you two sliders, one that makes your picture lighter or darker, and then another one that either increases or decreases the contrast, right? So that was brightness contrast. We did look at levels, right? So levels allows you to adjust the shadows, the highlights, and the midtones of your image separately, right? And we worked with this a couple times. We used it on the lesson with the picture of the car, right, with the headlight. That was like week 2. And then we used it again during the lesson with the retouching, right, with the picture of the young woman. And then we used levels to adjust that. Okay. Today, what we're going to look at is curves, which also allows you to adjust values in your picture, but it just gives you a little bit more control. Okay. So let's take a look at that. So we're going to go ahead and click on curves here. All right. So right over here, you guys can see in my layers panel, I now have a new layer. So here's my curves adjustment. And remember, adjustment layers affect all layers that are underneath them. Okay. So this curves adjustment is only going to affect my actors layer. It's not going to affect the action shot layer or even my color fill layer, because these two layers sit above the curves adjustment layer. Okay. So you'll see when we make adjustments here, only the picture, I mean, it may look like some of the other things are changing, but you'll see, really it's only the actors layer that's actually being modified. Okay. All right, so let's talk about curves. So we can see our curves adjustment here in our properties panel. Okay. All right, so what we're looking at right now is we're looking at a histogram that shows us the distribution of values within our picture, right? You guys remember the distribution of values is basically where the lights and the darks are in our picture, right? Think of it as like a graph of, like, if you're graphing how light or how dark every single pixel in this picture is, like, so each pixel that's like dark would be near the left side. So the furthest to the left you are, the darker that that pixel is. If a pixel is like on the lighter side, it'd be towards the right side, right? So in this picture, we have actually quite a bit of like really bright areas in this photo. You can see on the right side, pretty bright. And it's like, the light that's right behind their heads, right? There's a lot of that. The midtones are near the middle. So we do have quite a bit of midtones. And then we have some shadows in this picture. I mean, actually quite a bit of shadows, more shadows than even midtones, right? Okay, so the thing that makes curves work is this output line. So this output line is showing how these values are getting output or how they're getting shown, okay? So where the horizontal sort of axis is the position of these, values, right? Dark on the left, light on the right. This line is oriented vertically. So the lower down you are, the darker those pixels are getting output. And then the higher up you are, the lighter those pixels are getting output. Okay. So right now we have like a 1-to-1 sort of relationship where dark values are getting output dark, and then light values are getting output light. Okay. Now, if you're a photographer and you're just playing with curves, and a lot of photographers like to use curves, there are a couple different ways to approach adjusting things with this adjustment. Okay. Now, you could go in with like a pre-planned shape for the output line. Okay. So let me show you guys. Here's a common shape. So a lot of photographers will use what we call the S curve. Okay. Now to apply the S curve, what I'm going to do is I'm going to lock the midturn, the midtones. Okay. So the tone's right in the middle. So if I click on the output line right here, it places a pin on this spot. So the position of the line on this spot is now locked. Okay. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cursor. I'm going to come right over here to where the output line is. And when I bend this output line upwards take a look at what happens. When I bend it upwards, notice that certain parts of the picture get lighter. And actually, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to lock this side too, just so it doesn't move here. All right, so when I bend this part up, notice that certain parts of my picture got lighter. Do you guys see that? So right now, my highlights are getting brighter by bending this line up. Okay, now if I bend it down, like if I move this down, those values would get darker. You guys see that? So bending it up makes those values lighter. Bending it down makes those values darker. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to bend it up just like this. So I've made some of my light values lighter. Okay, and then I'm going to come over to this side where my shadows are. So these are the dark areas of my photo. And let me show you guys. If I bend it up, those values will get lighter. And then if I bend it down, those values would get darker. Okay. So this shape that I just created, it kind of looks like a letter S, right? So this is called the S curve. And photographers use the S curve to increase contrast in their images. All right, so let's think about that. So you guys remember I talked about how, if you have a picture and you make the light values lighter and the dark values darker, you're increasing the contrast, which increases the sense of depth in your picture and makes your images much more dramatic, right? So that's what's going on here. So notice if I hide the curves adjustment, here's the original picture. And then here it is with the S curve, right? So again, a lot of photographers will use this to increase contrast in their images, right? Now, some photographers will do the reverse S curve. So they'll come over here and they'll bend this down like that. And they'll take the dark values and they'll bend it up. All right, so let's take a look at this. So if you do the reverse S curve, you're decreasing contrast, right? And why is that happening? Well, you're making your light values darker and you're making your dark values lighter by bending this up. And so our values are getting closer and closer together, right? And you guys remember when your values get closer together, you're decreasing contrast in your image, right? So the S curve is used to increase contrast and the reverse S curve is used to decrease contrast, right? Okay, so any questions about that? About sort of working with kind of preset shapes. And there are a bunch of other shapes that, you might do, right? Or you might manually go in and bend certain values to get a certain effect. Right? Okay. Yeah.
What about moving the endpoints?
Same thing. So if you move the endpoints, right? So if you wanted your lightest values to become darker, like the true white to become darker,
Right.
then you could move the endpoint down, in which case that would become darker. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And we are gonna do that next. We're just gonna do it in a different way.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So let's go ahead. If you did what I did and we're playing around with the curves adjustment, let's go ahead and undo it in our history. So I'm just gonna undo it here. So I'm gonna go, oops, sorry, where is it? New curves layer, and then I modified it. So I want a clean curves adjustment layer here. Okay. All right, so we're back here. All right, so I could go in and I could manually, or I could, adjust the look of the picture from the curves, right, or from the histogram here. Another way you can do it is you can click on specific spots in your picture and modify it on the picture itself, and it will adjust the curves, like the histogram, like the curves adjustment to match. Okay, so the way that we do that is we select a little finger icon right here, little tool. If you hover over it, a little window will pop up and it says click and drag in image to modify the curve. Okay, let's go ahead and click on that. All right, so now we've selected that tool. And when you move your cursor to the picture, you'll notice wherever you are in the photo, it tells you where that spot is in your histogram. Like notice why I'm like, in his hair, I'm sort of in the bottom left corner there, right? On the left side, because it's like the darker values. When I'm like right where his face is or her face, right? I'm like right about where the midtones are. or where the background is, I'm sort of like where the midtones are. And then if you go to the really bright area behind their heads, right, I'm in the upper right corner because that's where the lightest values are. Okay. So what this allows you to do is you find a value that you want to adjust, right? So I want to take this super bright spot and I want to make it darker. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click. So I'm sitting here with the pointer where it's really bright, and I'm going to click with my mouse, and then I'm going to drag down. So when you drag down, it makes those values darker. Okay. So what I'm kind of doing here is I'm kind of like squinting a little bit, and then I'm just kind of like dragging it down just enough so that the sky here begins to match up with the sky over here. You guys see that? So they kind of feel consistent, like they sort of blend into each other. Okay. So I've made that darker so it matches up with this picture. Okay. All right, so that looks good, but the problem is his hair is still a little too dark, right? Or the shadows in his hair are too dark. So I'm just gonna find like a little dark spot in his hair, somewhere over here where it's kind of dark. Okay, it doesn't have to be the darkest spot, but just somewhere where it's pretty dark. And I'm gonna click and I'm gonna drag up to make that lighter. Okay. Now you only want to go to a certain point. You don't want to overdo it. Now, if you go way too light, what's going to happen is you're going to get this sort of curve where values on like in a certain spot. So right here where the midtones are, values that get lighter actually end up getting darker. And then values that are darker stay dark. And so you get this sort of like weird otherworldly sort of look. Okay. So you don't want situations where your curved line is sort of out of order. Okay. And that's what happens if you go too bright where the shadows are. So I'm going to undo that. So again, I'm over here where it's kind of dark, and I'm dragging up to lighten. So I'm just kind of lightening up to a certain point, right? There's kind of a limit. So you kind of want it to look kind of smooth and continuous, kind of like that. And you're going to get a result that's going to look natural. Okay. So this is what we're looking for. So a picture here, our picture looks, like a little bit more like flattened, a little bit more even, and that matches up better with the other picture. Okay. All right, so here's what it looked like without the curves adjustment, too much depth, and here's what it looks like after we did curves, right? So everything just blends together a lot better. Okay. All right. Okay, so this is our completed movie poster. We're not going to add text or anything like that. I mean, you certainly could. You guys know how to do that, right? You could create the text using the type tool and then apply that on top, right? But everything that we've done here, we've done non-destructively, okay? So at any point, if we wanted to make any adjustments to this, we could easily do that, right? And the reason that we want to do things non-destructively is that when you go out into like the professional realm and you work in Photoshop, everything sort of like in the creative field is done non-destructively, right? And the reason for that is a lot of times with these type of projects, you're going to have some sort of creative director or some creative manager that's overseeing the things that you're doing, right? And if they give you feedback, then you want to be able to make adjustments, right? Like if you're doing things destructively and then someone tells you to make some sort of change, while you're stuck, right? You can't change it. But everything that we've done here can be removed or modified at any time, right? So for example, if someone looked at this and they were like, oh, you know what? Like there are a lot of movie posters right now that are orange, right? Can we make this movie poster a different color? Like, if there were like a blue movie poster, that would stand out a lot more, right? Well, that's an easy change to do. So right over here, my color fill layer, if I double click on that, I can choose a different color. So if I wanted to do a blue poster, I could do that, and I could choose whatever blue I want, right? I could do like a sky blue. I could do like a darker blue. I could do a less saturated blue, right? I have a lot of different options here, right? So I might go something like that. Right. Maybe the studio comes back and they say, we're investing a lot of money in these actors, right? And we want to be able to make them the selling point. But at the moment on your poster, they're just kind of faded. you know, can we make them more prominent? Yeah, no problem. Well, we make an adjustment to the curves, right? And if we go in and then maybe we make the shadows a little bit darker, right? They're going to be a lot more prominent. If we increase the contrast a little bit with our S curve here, right? Like that. And now we can see them a lot better, right? So here's what it looked like before. And then here is after we've made some changes to the curves, right? Or they might look at this movie poster and they might go, you know what? Like, it's just really blue. Like, it's just like all one color. Is there a way to bring in a little bit more variety? We want to see some more colors in here. Well, no problem. The way that we're going to do that is we're going to click on the color fill layer. Remember, this is the layer that's getting blended into the picture, right? Making everything blue. While if we turn down the opacity on it, some of the other colors will start to show through. So I'm going to go ahead and adjust opacity here. And notice as I turn down the opacity, some of the color from the background image begins to, you know, become visible. So I can see some of their skin color. There's a little bit of that green in the leaves. So if I want, you know, more blue, well, I'll just make the opacity higher. If I want more of color to show through, I can just set it lower. So maybe for this one at, I don't know, like 80% or 85%. Let's go, or, you know, actually maybe I might go like 80%, or even, let's go lower. Let's go 75%. I'll go 75, like that. Do you guys see that? And so now it's not so much of that blue effect. Okay. And actually everything that we've done right now, we can actually reverse sort of engineering, you know? Like if I wanted to get rid of the curves effect, look at this, I can hide it temporarily. So if I hit the little eyeball, here it is without the effect of curves. If I wanted to hide the effect of the color fill, well, I mean, I could remove the blending mode, go back to normal. Here's what it looks like with the slight opacity adjustment, right? I could hide that layer. So here it is without the color fill. My layer mask is what's allowing this sort of ghostly effect to happen, right? So here's how you disable a layer mask. If you right click on it, you'll see the option to disable layer mask. I can click. Now the layer mask is still there. It's just not affecting the image at the moment. So it's like essentially invisible. Hide that layer, it's invisible, and then I can hide this layer. Do you guys see that? So everything that we've done is still there. It's like it's all still there. It's just hidden, right? It's just right now all invisible. So I can bring back the image. There's the other picture. I can enable the layer mask, right? I can bring back the color fill. I can apply the blending mode, which was color. And then bring back the, oh, sorry. I think I did it on the wrong layer here. On color, like that. And then finally, bring back curves, just like that. Okay. All right. Okay, so any questions about what we did here?
No, pretty cool.
All right. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and save this because you know, we did spend quite a bit of time on here. So let's go. I'm going to do save as, and let's call it the Lucky One movie poster. Just like that. All right. Let's go ahead. We'll hit save on it. Okay. All right. Let's go ahead and close this. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. All right, so we have just enough time here to create one more movie poster together. Now, we're going to use the same skills, the same approach, right? Some adjustments, but you guys can see, you'll be able to see this technique. We can use it for a lot of different situations. So let's go ahead. We're going to create a new document. I'm going to do Command or Control N, and is new, and is Nancy. Let's go ahead and create it to this letter size again. So we'll do letter size. I'm going to click Create. So let's click create here. All right, let's go and double click the hand tool here just to resize it so that fits our screen. Okay, so similar approach, right? So let's go ahead. We're going to bring in a picture of our main character or like the main actor. So we're going to go to File. Let's go down to Place Embedded. So we'll do Place Embedded. And the image that we're looking for is this Tony Stark.jpg. So Tony Stark.jpg. All right, let's go ahead and we'll click place. So here's an image. All right, so here's a picture of Robert Downey Jr. From the film Iron Man. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna create a movie poster to Iron Man. So just like what we did with the other one, I wanna position it near the top, right? So we're gonna place it near the top here. And I'm gonna size it up. Now, I don't want him to be so big as the other one. Like, I mean, pretty big. I want him to take up about half, maybe like half of my canvas, maybe a little bit past it. I think a good sort of visual reference point is like where his shoulders are. I kind of want his shoulder to sort of span the width of my canvas. So something kind of like that. Okay. And we can always adjust things after too. So, I think usually I do have to kind of like make little minor adjustments when we bring in the other image. So let's go ahead. I'm just going to hit return here to go ahead and finish placing this picture. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and bring in our next image. So I'm going to go to File. And then we're, again, going to come down to Place Embedded. So we'll do Place Embedded here. And the next image is going to be this Iron Man Suits.jpg. So Iron Man Suits.jpg. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and then we'll click Place. I'm going to click Place here. So here's another picture. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift this down to the bottom. Now, I'm not going to resize this at all because I think the size, the way it's resized to fit looks really good. But the way I've kind of positioned the pictures in the past is I have this sort of like near the bottom. Okay, so this like that. And then I might, let's go ahead and hit return here. I'm just going to hit return or enter to place this image. And what I want to do is I want to use the move tool here. Let's switch to the move tool. Keyboard shortcut, the letter V. V is in Viking. V is in Victor. And I'm just going to adjust these two pictures. And what I'm looking for is there are these lines right here on his suit. You guys see there's like this line here. It kind of creates almost like a little curve. And then there's like this ceiling in this other picture. If you line them up correctly, they sort of look like they're continuous. Do you guys see that? Like I'm lining this up and it kind of looks like this line kind of continues where this curve is. That's kind of what I'm looking for, like that. You guys see that? So this is the position. So again, if it looks too far, they're not lined up correctly. We kind of want it to overlap and then feel continuous, just like that. You guys see that? All right, so something kind of like that. So it kind of looks like this, the top of this line here continues into the top of this line, like that. Okay. All right, so that's what we want. Okay. Now let's take a look really quick. So the picture right here, so these two pictures overlap, but notice the space where they overlap is very, very small, right? It's not that, it's like really from here to here, right? That's really the span where they overlap. So let's go ahead. What we're going to do is we're going to take the layer that's on top, okay? Just like what we did with the previous movie poster, we're going to create a layer mask, a blank one. So in my layers panel here, let's go ahead and go down here to the icon that looks like a rectangle with a circle in the center. I'm going to go ahead and click on it. And there it is. So there's my blank layer mask. Again, it's the third icon from the left. If you've forgotten where it is, third icon from the left there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, use a gradient. So I'm going to select my gradient tool, keyboard shortcut, the letter G. G is in gradient. G is in Greg. Okay. Make sure that you have the layer mask here selected. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a gradient. Again, that goes from black to white here. I'm going to start right below where this edge is. Okay. So right below this edge. And then I'm going to hold down Shift here. And I'm just going to drag it down to right above where his head is. Like the little one, the head of like the one where you see his whole body there. I'm just going slightly above his head. So something kind of like that. Do you guys see that? So here's kind of what it looks like. Okay. And actually, you know what? I think I could even actually go lower. Let me undo that really quick. I might even go a touch lower. Oops. Oh, that's what happens if you're not doing it on the layer mask. It actually draws the gradient, so we don't want to do that. All right, so I might even go just a touch lower, something like that. There we go. All right. Yeah, I think that looks a lot better. Okay. All right, so things are looking pretty good, right? So now we're at the point where we want to make everything look a little more cohesive, right? So before what we did was we brought in a color fill layer and then we tinted the whole image, right? The way that we're going to make this feel more cohesive is we're going to bring in a texture and then we'll use a blending mode on it. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the top layer. All right, so the top layer here. All right, let's go ahead. We're going to go to File. We're going to come down to Place Embedded. So we'll do Place Embedded. And the image that we're going to be bringing in is this brushed metal.jpg. So brushed metal.jpg here. And let's go ahead. We're going to click Place. All right. So I was thinking here we have a picture that kind of looks like, a picture of Iron Man. So I would think, it'd be kind of interesting to have kind of like a brushed metal kind of look to it, right? Now, right now my picture is landscape, right? My movie poster is vertical. So here I might want to rotate it. So let's go ahead and we'll rotate this, just kind of like how we did, how we rotated the leaves. And up to you, whichever one you want on top. I think for this one, I'll try out the darker side on the bottom and we'll do the lighter side on top. I think that might make his face more sort of prominent. I'm gonna bring that up. Now, since this is a texture, I probably wouldn't matter too much if we stretch it. So I'm just gonna hold down Shift here and I'm just gonna stretch it so that it fits. Making it like that. You guys see that? And I'm gonna go ahead and just hit return just to go ahead and place that image. Okay. All right, and now it's just about experimenting, right, with our blending modes. Let's see if we find one that works, the one that looks good, okay? So again, I'm gonna click where it says normal. So I'm gonna click normal here. And I'm just gonna scroll down. I'm just gonna take a look. Now, some of them aren't really visible, so they don't really work, right? But if I keep going here, let's see if we can find, oh, now we have other ones that kind of look like the metal. So screen's kind of interesting. Color dodge is kind of interesting. Oh, okay. Now we're getting something interesting here. Soft light is kind of interesting. I can kind of see the textures in the metal. That looks okay. Hard light. Oh, that looks kind of interesting. Vivid light. Oh, I don't know about some of these other ones. It might get a little too intense. Luminosity. Okay, so I think some of them look promising. Okay, I kind of like some of these other ones. Like soft light looked okay. Overlay. I don't know. I kind of like hard light. I might go with hard light. The only issue with hard light is that the spot where it was really bright, where the metal was, is not, doesn't really work as well. So I'm thinking what I want to do is maybe I want to stretch this like white part off of the picture because I don't like how it makes, like the top of his head just sort of all white, right? So there are a couple ways we can do this. So let's go ahead. I'm thinking the easiest way is select the brushed metal layer, okay? And then I'm going to switch to the move tool. I'm going to hit the letter V. V is in Victor, V is in Viking. And notice this, I can just shift that layer up. You guys see that? So I can just shift that layer up, kind of like that. Okay. And then I can hold down the shift key and then I can just kind of stretch it down just like that. Do you guys see that? So there we go. Oh yeah. So you kind of see the scratches. So I think that looks pretty good. Now I don't like how it kind of like overwhelms his face, right? So I think it looks a lot better, but maybe we want to turn down the opacity on the blending mode a little bit. So let's go ahead and play with that. So opacity here. I'm just going to change it, turn it down just a little bit because I like the scratches, but I don't want too much of it. So maybe something like, I don't know, like 60% or like 65%, I think looks pretty good. So somewhere around there. All right. Okay. I think I like that. So I like it at 60%. I think that looks pretty cool. Okay. All right. And then the last thing I think I want to bring in is I want to bring in the title of the movie. And I'm going to show you guys how blending modes can make the whole process like of incorporating it so easy. Okay, so let me show you guys. So let's go ahead. We'll do it together. So let's go ahead. We'll click on the brushed metal layer because we want to be on top. Okay. And let's go ahead. We're going to place the next image. So we're going to go to File. Let's go down to Place Embedded. And the last image that we're bringing in is going to be this, where is it? Iron Man. Oh, Iron Man 3 logo .jpg. That's what we want. So Iron Man 3 logo. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and then we'll click place. So we'll place that. All right, so here's the logo. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this like the bottom here. Now we might adjust things after. I'm just going to place it for now down here. Okay. And then let's go ahead. We're going to hit return or enter on our keyboard just to place it. Okay. Now, the thing about this logo is that there are parts of the logo that are black. Okay. So whenever you have like a background that is black or white, you can always just think to yourself, there's probably some blending mode that will either get rid of the black part or the white part. All right. Because there are blending modes that, like I said, affect black and white differently. And there's probably some blending mode that will just leave you with the word Iron Man and like the logo for Marvel and just get rid of the black. Now it's just a matter of experimenting and trying to find it. Okay. So right over here where the blending modes are, let's go ahead and check it out. So I'm going to try, I'm just going to scroll through this. So there are a couple of options here. Okay, so lighten already looks really promising, right? So lighten is definitely one of them. Screen is another option. So depending on which one looks better to you, I could go lighten, screen. Linear dodge works. I don't know if it's the best one. I don't like how lighter color makes a part of that letter M kind of disappear. And then the rest of these don't quite get me there. I mean, like exclusion also kind of works. All right, so I'm between either lighten or screen, right? And I think I kind of like, I might go with lighten. I think lighten works well. So I might go with that. Okay. All right, so now we see the logo and now I can just adjust it. So I can use my move tool here. I can scale down the title, just make it a little bit smaller. And now I can kind of find a nice position for it so it works within the composition. What I figured out was if you place the word Marvel right here, right where the platform is, it kind of works really well. You get like a nice little spot where the title goes there. And I just hit return just like that. And if I need to like nudge it, I can also use the arrow keys to also nudge it as well. All right. And there it is. So really quickly, we were able to put together this, professional looking like movie poster together. All right. Okay. So any questions? Any questions about what we did here?
I'm stuck with the scaling the title, the Iron Man. How?
Oh, you need to hit return. So after you scale it, you have to hit return or enter to apply the transformation.
No, I can, but I can't. I can't scale it down. Where?
Oh, so we scale it using the move tool. So you need to switch to the move tool, and then you click on the layer that you want to transform. And then I think it's like it's a recent thing that that Adobe made a change to the move tool that if you select a layer, it automatically allows you to transform the layer. If you don't see the transformation box, you can also use the transform function. So you do Command or Control T. T is in transform. T is in Tom.
That works for me. Yeah.
Yeah.
Control T. Okay.
And then after you're done with the transformation, hit return, and it will.
Yep. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Great. Okay. Any other questions about this? All right. Okay, so that is it for today's lesson. So if you want to save this, you're certainly welcome to do that. You can go to File, do Save As, and you might call this, Iron Man poster or something, or movie poster. Right? Do that.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. All right. So that's where this course ends, right? So if you guys enjoyed this, if you want to continue, learning about non-destructive editing and how non-destructive editing applies to things like photo retouching, photo restoration, other types of collaging, like montaging and stuff, there are non-destructive ways to do a lot of the things that we did in the last lesson. That is what intermediate Photoshop focuses on, right? So we do things like, I show you how to create greeting cards where you can create a layout with preset sort of windows for your pictures and for your text, and you just drag and drop, images into those slots. With photo retouching, what we do, or photo restoration, one of the lessons is I show you, I give you guys like a completely torn up picture. We use non-destructive techniques to completely reassemble the picture, and then we do retouching on top of the pieces. So we're actually retouching across multiple layers. I also, at the end of the course, I like to touch on other sort of uses of Photoshop. So I have like a lesson about digital painting, things like that. So if you guys are interested, we are offering that class next semester. I think we offer it like once a year or so. We might be offering it in the spring as well. I think we're sort of like discussing that as a possibility. The only thing about that class is that it's one of those harder classes for us to fill because, the imaging basics is a prerequisite. And that's a much, smaller, for the intermediate class, and the pool of students is a lot smaller. And so, we'll see how, we'll see how registration looks in the fall. And if there are a lot of people that are interested, then we might also offer it in the spring as well. So I just letting you guys know that there is kind of like a next step. Otherwise, please keep in touch. It was an absolute pleasure for me to teach you guys, and I love it whenever you create something interesting. I still get emails from past students sharing interesting projects that they've created. Like if you create like an interesting holiday card for your family or something, I get those from students. Or if you have questions or anything, feel free to reach out via email. As I said before with the recordings, I'm just going to leave those up on my YouTube channel. So if you want to revisit them, you're certainly welcome to do that. I'm not going to be removing them or anything like that. So as long as my account, is active, whatever, you guys want access to the YouTube videos. And I hope to see you guys in a future class. Okay.
I definitely will sign up.
Okay. Okay.
The only thing is that I'm going to be in Europe, so I'll be signing up at 12:30 at night from 12:30 to 3:30 if the hours are the same.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And it
But
is it
that's
is
okay.
it is an 8-week class though, in the fall. And similar to this one, it's like once a week. So
Yep.
are you gonna be in Europe that long?
Well, not that long. Like this time, I've only taken 2 classes here and the rest in Europe, so it was all all in the middle of the night.
Oh, I see.
And then I'm going back at the end of this month. I'm coming back in November, so I'll be catching up some here and some overseas.
Okay. Okay.
So, but it's okay. I sleep during the day and then I stay up until 3:30 a.m.
Oh no, that's exciting though. But yeah, and so safe travels to you. And yeah, and,
Thank you.
and if you guys are also interested too, I also teach the Lightroom class. So if you're interested in Lightroom, uh Lightroom has a lot of sort of overlap to Photoshop, so a lot of editing things, but there are also some tools in Lightroom that make the edits more like more efficient. So if you're a photographer and you want to be able to organize your images and just have tools specifically geared towards editing photographs, Lightroom's really good, and I teach that course as well.
Yeah, I took that, Jerry, and I can't find the files anymore. I think that course is closed. I took it.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's something that I think I mentioned. Yeah. when this class first started. So so our first week was normal. And then after the second week, what Montgomery College was doing was that they
Yeah.
were migrating the courses. So we were like sort of moving to like another version of Blackboard. So unfortunately, all the classes and all the materials that were hosted on the previous version
Oh,
were
that's too bad.
lost.
Ah,
Yeah. So yeah, like previous recordings that I had are all gone. Uh,
yeah.
so that's just kind of unfortunate. But from here on out, we're going to be, on the newer platform. And any classes that take place after this, so that's why the first week, I think the recording for the first week, unfortunately, was lost.
Yeah. Well, maybe I'll take also the Lightroom class again.
Okay, yeah,
Yeah, we'll
that's a
see.
great one. Like, I'm a photographer, and I use both Photoshop and Lightroom, and I think they have their places. They're both.
Yeah, I can see where one of the other. Sometimes one is more, I don't know if it's effective or quicker or easier. I don't know. Lightroom, I think it was faster. I didn't have all the features that Photoshop has, but certain things could be done really quick with good results. That's what I thought.
Oh yeah, yeah. And actually interesting, like, like we're talking about non-destructive editing today. Everything that you do in Lightroom is non-destructive. And so it's a very it's a different sort of approach to editing.
Yeah,
Thinking about it conceptually, it's very different.
yeah.
But it all works, so.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Oh, you're
Great
you're
class.
welcome. You're welcome. All right.
And
I have
I'll,
that
yeah, yeah, I'll see you soon then.
Okay. Okay. I hope to see you
Bye-bye.
soon as well. All right. Well, good night. Good night, Victoria.
Bye.
Bye.